Chapter 1526. It was a cursed snake. Bufong was no stranger to it. After all, it was just a karma that entangled you. Bufong had often seen it in Earth Prison. However, this time, the cursed snake brought Bufong unprecedented pressure. The pressure was so great that Bufong could not help but take a deep breath. The vermilion bird cried and flapped its wings. The entire spirit sea seemed to be engulfed in flames. The terrifying flames swept out and turned into a vast sea of fire. The golden divine dragon wriggled, and the scales on its body shone brightly. The white tiger opened its mouth and let out a roar. It strode toward the cursed snake step by step. The black tortoise remained motionless. The four artifact spirits surrounded the cursed snake. "What's this? Interesting." The dead woman glanced at the four artifact spirits, the corners of her mouth curling up slightly. The four artifact spirits gave her a lot of pressure. It was really unusual for these existences to appear in the spirit sea of a demigod. However, the dead woman was very confident. Although these artifact spirits were strong, they were still no match for her cursed snake. After all, the power of the curse was far beyond the imagination of the people of the chaotic universe. Hiss! The cursed snake glowed green all over. The dead woman hovered behind it with her hands clasped behind her back, watching calmly. Rumble! The cursed snake moved, instantly setting off terrifying waves. Its figure burst out like a long dragon. The dark green power of the curse spread out like an invisible field. Bufong had seen it with his own eyes. The cursed snake had killed the sword god and the fist saint. So many god kings have been unable to resist it with just one move. The power of the curse was extremely terrifying. The golden divine dragon let out a long roar and swiped at the void with its claws, causing huge waves to rise in the spirit sea. The golden dragon's body was faintly discernible in the waves. Little host spirit sea is protected by me, Nicholas the handsome dragon. It's impregnable. How dare this little snakeskin act so presumptuously here? The golden dragon wriggled, opened its mouth, and breathed out a breath. It smashed into the body of the cursed snake, causing its body to sway. With a flick of its tail, a dark green color instantly flooded the area. The vermilion bird stirred. It spat out scarlet flames and collided with the snake tail. The cursed snake was instantly suppressed. The white tiger did not make a move. It strode forward and watched from afar. Its eyes shone with excitement. After staying in the host spirit sea for so long, a heavyweight had finally arrived. They were no longer small shrimps that could be destroyed with a single swipe of their claws. White Tiger was good at attacking, but he didn't attack foolishly. He would first look for the enemy's weakness, and then kill with one strike. His tiger-like eyes scanned the area and locked onto the cursed snake. The black tortoise yawned, causing waves to surge in his spiritual sea. Bufong landed on the side of the divine sense entity, calmly watching the battle in the spirit sea. The golden dragon, vermilion bird, and the others had been suppressed for far too long, and they needed a good release. Boom! The cursed snake was huge and full of vigor. It was extremely fierce. It opened its mouth wide, revealing its sharp fangs, biting and snarling. The golden dragon and the vermilion bird fought against the cursed snake. For a moment, the battle was in full swing. The dead woman glanced around indifferently. She didn't expect that the cursed snake would be stopped. However, so what if it was stopped? It might be able to stop the cursed snake, but it might not be able to stop her. Squinting at Bufong in the distance, the corners of the dead woman's mouth curved upward. She could see that Bufong had pinned his hopes on these four fellows. If that was the case, she would completely crush this fellow's hope. Boom! The dead woman moved. She took a step and appeared in front of the golden dragon in a flash. The golden dragon froze. It raised its claw and slapped at the dead woman. However, the dead woman just raised her palm and collided with the dragon's claw. A rumbling sound rang out. The golden dragon was sent flying. The vermilion bird cried. A scarlet flame began to gather in its mouth. Then it spatted at the dead woman. The vermilion bird. It's a top existence among the phoenixes. It's rare to see one. The dead woman said. She held an orchid in her hand and pushed it forward. Dark green energy turned into a wall, blocking the scarlet flame. It kept burning, emitting a sizzling sound. The vermilion bird flapped its wings and kept spitting fire, but it still couldn't break the wall. The dead woman smiled faintly. I can sense that your strength is relying on this body strength. Unfortunately, this body's strength is too weak. Otherwise, I might have to use some tricks to deal with you, the dead woman said. Her eyes turned dark green again, and a terrible aura exploded out of her. Her hair fluttered in the wind. Her figure flashed through the void like a ghost. In just a flash, she appeared in front of the vermilion bird. He pointed a finger at the vermilion bird's head. The vermilion bird was knocked down from the sky and smashed into Bufong's spirit sea. The impact caused the spirit sea to churn violently. Bufong's eyes narrowed. This woman, she was a little strong. She was indeed a cursed goddess who appeared once in every era. Her strength was indeed fearsome. The golden dragon seemed a little angry out of humiliation. He couldn't believe that he was sent flying by a little girl. How could he tolerate that? The power of the curse spread as if it wanted to corrode them. However, the corrosion failed. The dead woman was quite surprised by this. In her opinion, these fellows might be the souls of some powerful existences residing in the young man's spirit sea, just like how she was residing in the cursed goddess's consciousness. However, the difference was that she was going to be the host now, and all these fellows who tried to stop her had to die. The dead woman's eyes narrowed, and blue veins bulged all over her face. The cursed goddess was used to being the enemy of the whole world, so everything she did was for the sake of her own strength. If she took over Bufong's body, she would become even stronger. Boom! The dark green energy seemed to turn into 2 green whips. The whips swept out and wrapped around the golden dragon and the vermilion bird as if they were walking dogs. Bufong took a deep breath. This dead woman's cultivation base at her peak was that of a heaven god. Bufong furrowed his brows and muttered to himself. To be able to suppress the golden dragon and the vermilion bird like this, she was definitely extraordinary. From the fact that she was suppressed by the heaven god's treasure, he could tell that she was not ordinary. He didn't expect her to be so fierce. With the help of Yu's body, she could exert the fighting prowess of a god emperor. And now that she had awakened her consciousness, she could even suppress the golden dragon and the vermilion bird. Bufong felt that things were getting a little tricky. Roar! Suddenly, a tiger's roar exploded in his spirit sea. His spirit sea seemed to be churning with raging waves. Terrible rumbles kept ringing out. The white tiger howling to the heavens moved. The ferocious tiger descended the mountain and approached in an instant. It threw out a tiger claw. Unable to dodge, it slapped hard on the dead woman's body. A boom rang out. It slapped the dead woman away. Her body seemed to be on the verge of being smashed to pieces. The golden dragon and the vermilion bird released their control and soared into the sky. A supreme pressure exploded out of them. The 4 spirit seas suddenly became extremely calm. The dead woman's curse power was suppressed. Interesting, the dead woman steadied herself and gave it a thought. In an instant, the cursed snake began to divide into countless long green snakes that slithered in the air. The ferocious white tiger rushed in and slapped the snakes with his claws, shattering them. With a tiger's roar, the snakes were smashed to pieces. The battle instantly became white-hot. The white tiger had the upper hand. In the distance, Bufong breathed a long sigh of relief. It seemed that the dead woman's consciousness had not reached the level of a heaven god. Otherwise, the 4 artifact spirits would have been defeated in an instant. But even if she was not as strong as a heaven god, she was not far from it. This dead woman was in existence from the same era as the ancient heaven gods. It seemed that she was a little angry because of the repeated defeats. Her hair was disheveled, and she hissed. Looking at her ferocious appearance, Bufong couldn't help but twitch his mouth. You are more adorable. They're both curse goddesses, but why is the gap between them so huge? The dead woman's body suddenly grew larger, and the dark green energy around her was devoured. Rumble! She fixed her eyes on Bufong, opened her mouth, and a terrible suction force exploded out, trying to devour Bufong. After devouring Bu Fang's consciousness, she would become the master of this spirit sea and occupy it. Then, she would obtain the fleshly body and power of a heaven god. Bu Fang furrowed his brows. Sure enough, the dead woman's target was him. The 4 artifact spirits rushed up. However, they were intercepted by the cursed snake. The dead woman's aura was powerful, and she wanted to devour Bu Fang. Suddenly, the true form of divine, sense beside Bu Fang, opened its eyes. Meanwhile, the god of cooking's menu beneath the true form began to shine with a dazzling golden light. The round divine power liquid drop was spinning. The god of cooking's menu shot out a stream of energy, which gathered in midair and shook like a bell. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like the evening drum and morning bell. Then, the dead woman's expression changed abruptly, because she felt a great sense of terror. Gurgle, the water in the spirit sea, seemed to begin to boil. The golden dragon, the vermilion bird, the white tiger, and the black turtle all jerked their heads up and looked into the depths of the spirit sea. Is it coming out? They murmured. Bu Fang was also shocked. He turned his head curiously and looked into the depths of the spirit sea. It was as if a terrible existence was about to tear through the fog and come out. Bu Fang's heart skipped a beat. There was still one piece of the god of cooking set that had not come out, which meant that there was another artifact spirit that had not appeared yet. A long time ago, the golden dragon, the vermilion bird, and the others had said that there was a great terror in the depths of the spirit sea. It would take a long time for Bu Fang to make that terror appear. Now it seemed that, was the great terror going to appear? Was it because it was disturbed by the dead woman? In fact, Bu Fang had a way to deal with the dead woman. After all, he still had the divine power liquid drops. However, since there was a better way, it would be best not to waste divine power. God power liquid droplets. Every drop that was used was 1 drop less. No one knew if there would be any more liquid droplets appearing in the next mission. Therefore, Bu Fang did not really want to use them. Rumble. A melodious bestial roar rang out. As soon as it appeared, the cursed snake's body froze. The golden dragon, the white tiger, and the others were stunned. The dead woman focused her eyes and glanced coldly at the depths of the spirit sea. What kind of monster is this boy? I can't believe there's a monster in your spirit sea. The dead woman sucked in a cold breath. Even the ancient cursed goddess, who was comparable to a heaven god, had never encountered such a situation. He had never encountered such a situation before. Rumble, the ground began to shake. Ripples spread out on the surface of his spirit sea. The god of cooking's menu was glowing, attracting the terror in the depths of the spirit sea. Finally, under the gazes of the dead woman and Bu Fang, the fog in the depths of the spirit sea was torn apart. A huge palm slowly reached out from the depths. It slapped toward the huge dead woman. Chapter 15:27. The atmosphere was somewhat quiet. In midair, Bu Fang and you stared at each other. Down below, everyone was watching with bated breath. They were all knowledgeable people. After all, even the weakest among them was a god, and they knew very well what Bu Fang was facing now. The dead woman and Bu Fang were engaged in a fierce battle of divine senses. Compared with a real collision of strength, a collision of divine senses was more dangerous, and there was a greater chance of being crushed. Bu Fang was just a demigod. No matter how hard they thought, they could not imagine how strong Bu Fang's divine sense was. Perhaps Bu Fang's spirit sea had been completely crushed to pieces. It had been too long. It had been so long that the experts down below were beginning to feel a little restless. After all, the heaven god's treasure was not far away. The heaven god's bones, blood, laws, and treasures were all there. Even a wisp of chaotic energy, which could help someone become a heaven god, was there. The heaven god's treasure was constantly exuding temptation. People could not help but want to move toward it. Almost everyone was tempted. King Pingyang, King Tianlong, and the other experts were also tempted. Many high-grade god kings' breathing quickened. Their eyes flickered with greed as they looked at the heavenly god's treasure. As long as they could obtain it, their cultivation bases would skyrocket, and they might even have a chance to break through to the heaven god realm and become immortal existences. However, the dead woman's threat and pressure were too great. Yuchio, the sword god, was a top expert famous throughout the ancient heaven god's relic. There was also Xian Kong, the fist saint. Both of them possessed mighty strength. Even so, they were killed by the dead woman and turned into a pile of bones. However, this was good news for the people present, because if all the top-notch experts were annihilated, then their opportunity would come. When the top experts made a move, their chances of obtaining the heaven god's treasure were slim, and they might not even have a chance to get a share. But now, things are different. They had a chance to obtain the heaven god's treasure. This made the hearts of many people who had chosen to wait and see burst into flames. On top of that, the dead woman and Bu Fong had been in a stalemate for too long. They finally couldn't hold it in any longer. Boom! A high-grade god king made a move. His strength was very strong, but he had never squeezed into the god king list. Normally, he wouldn't have a chance, but now, he had the chance to see this treasure. He turned into a stream of light and shot out. His speed was simply too fast. After flying for a long distance, it attracted the attention of many people. An uproar suddenly resounded. One by one, figures rushed out without a care for their own safety. Even Dragon King Tian could not help but fly out. A group of people swarmed toward the heavenly god's treasure. While the dead woman was distracted by Bu Fong, he would seize the treasure and run. They were getting closer and closer to the treasure, but the dead woman still didn't move. Everyone's breathing became hurried, and their eyes widened. In the spirit sea, the dead woman felt a little cold. She raised her head and looked at the palm strike coming from the depths of the misty spirit sea. It was not a human hand, but a hoof. That's right, it was a hoof. The hoof broke through the thick mist and shot out from the depths of the spirit sea. Almost in the blink of an eye, it bombarded the female corpse. "What is this?" the dead woman screamed. A huge crater appeared on her dark green body. There seemed to be energy flowing in the pit. She couldn't even stop this hoof. How is that possible? The golden dragon, the vermilion bird, and the others watched quietly as the great existence began his performance. It had been a long time since he last appeared. The golden dragon and the vermilion bird sighed with emotion. Perhaps, in the near future, they would be able to be neighbors with that great existence. "I don't care what you are. If you dare to stop me, I'll destroy you. My curse. Make the whole world my enemy." The dead woman screamed. The next moment, she drew a circle in the air with her palm. The circle was filled with the power of the curse. The power was so strong that it almost materialized. Buzz, the circle was pushed out and immediately wrapped around the hoof. The dark green curse crawled toward the hoof like maggots in a bone. "It's over," the golden dragon said when he saw that. Sure enough, the next moment, the cursed circle wrapped around the hoof broke and dissipated like melting snow. A bestial roar came from the depths of the mist. Then, the mist was torn apart. Vaguely, a huge shadow could be seen floating in it. A ripping sound rang out. Another palm came from the depths of the mist. This time, it was not a hoof but a claw. It had 5 claws, and there were scales on them. Boom! As soon as the claw fell, it opened, emitting a sharp aura as it grabbed toward the dead woman. The dead woman wanted to resist, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't move the claw at all. Finally, a ripping sound rang out. The claw fell and grabbed the dead woman's body. She struggled. The cursed snake hissed and joined the battle, trying to help the dead woman break free. However, it was stunned by a bestial roar from the existence in the depths of the spirit sea. It didn't dare to move. The dead woman struggled. Her eyes were filled with fear. The claw rose and slowly retracted into the depths of the mist. It wrapped around the dead woman. She refused. She had finally woken up, and she didn't want to die. Her eyes were fixed on Bu Fong, filled with madness and resentment. He was her prey. How did she end up like this? Instead, she became someone else's prey. The dead woman's hands grew larger. She grabbed at the void, not wanting to be pulled into the depths of the mist. However, the existence in the depths of the mist kept pulling harder. She couldn't resist. Finally, she was pulled in bit by bit. I can't accept this. I can't accept this. I want to curse you. Curse you. The dead woman roared, her face ferocious. The invisible, dark green energy seemed to turn into a strange fluctuation, shooting toward Bufong. The dead woman laughed horribly. As she laughed, she was pulled into the depths of the mist. In the end, all that was left was that creepy laughter. Slurp, accompanied by the dead woman's miserable howl and the tumbling mist, the sound of chewing rang out. Crunch, crunch, it made one's scalp go numb. Finally, he let out a loud burp. Everything fell silent. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. It turned out that there was such a big shot in his spirit sea. The golden dragon and vermilion bird had said that this big shot was extremely fierce. He hadn't taken it seriously. After all, he had never seen it before. But now, sure enough, it was extraordinarily fierce. The soul of the ancient curse goddess was eaten just like that? Was the curse unleashed by the dead woman before she was swallowed, all shot toward Bufong? She wanted to curse Bufong. The curse goddess's curse was extremely terrifying. It was not something that even heaven gods were willing to touch. Once touched, it would penetrate deep into the soul and cause great harm to one's cultivation path. Even though the dead woman was weak now, the curse she released was still extremely vicious. Once Bufong was hit by it, his life would be ruined. It would be difficult for him to survive, let alone become the god of cooking who stood at the top of the food chain. It was a circle. The dead woman drew a circle, cursing Bufong. It was a deadly circle. It was getting closer and closer to Bufong, but it could not be avoided. The circle was directional. Since the target of the curse was Bufong, it would definitely hit Bufong. It made his hair stand on end. Even though he was a soul, Bufong felt his hair stand on end. The curse was a kind of insidious power, and it did not seem to belong to this world. It was exciting to think that you would become so strong in the future. Buzz, just as the cursed circle was about to close in, the god of cooking's menu lit up. It turned slightly and glowed. Then, the cursed power was absorbed by the god of cooking's menu. After flashing for a while, the god of cooking's menu dimmed. Hiss! In the distance, all that was left was the huge cursed snake. At this moment, he was a little isolated and helpless. The dead woman's death caught him off guard. Without the dead woman's help, the cursed snake was surrounded by the golden dragon, the vermilion bird, the black turtle, and the white tiger. For some reason, it looked a little miserable. It wanted to escape. However, the golden dragon, the vermilion bird, the white tiger, and the black turtle pounced on it, tearing it apart and devouring it. Among them, the golden dragon ate the most. Hovering in his spirit's sea, Bufong exhaled. He turned his head and glanced at the depths of his spirit sea. The artifact spirit of the last piece of the god of cooking set. With such a strong artifact spirit, the god of cooking set should be very strong, right? Bufong's heart was suddenly filled with anticipation. His mind flickered. His consciousness returned to his body. Bufong opened his eyes. Nethery's beautiful face was right in front of him. At this moment, you looked a little confused. Before she could understand what had happened, the dead woman's consciousness was destroyed, and you regained control of her body. For a moment, she was not used to such a powerful force. Well, wake up. It's time to reap the harvest. Bufong raised his hand and patted you on the head. Nethery was taken aback. She rolled her eyes and rested them on Bufong. The wound on Bufong's neck soon melted like snow. The dead woman's consciousness had disappeared, but the wound on Yu's shoulder was still there. Bufong couldn't help but take a deep look at it. Time to reap the harvest. You paused. Then, she turned her head and looked at the group of people down below. The experts, who were running noisily, suddenly froze. They felt that above their heads, the dead woman, who was confronting Bufong, seemed to have stopped. She turned her head and looked at them. It's over, isn't it? They were a little embarrassed. His current situation was a little difficult to advance or retreat. An uproar broke out. There was no other way. They could only charge forward. For the heaven god's treasure, they had to charge. A puzzled look appeared on her face. She didn't move. After all, she was not the dead woman at this moment. Bufong glanced indifferently at the group of people. The heaven god's treasure. Bufong felt that his Taotai arm was a little hot. It was the call of the heaven god's bone to his arm. This heaven god's treasure. I can't let it go, Bufong thought to himself. Suddenly, Bufong furrowed his brows. He felt an extreme sense of unease. As the black gas slowly spread out from the ground, the experts who were running in the sky were immediately entangled by the black smoke. Puff, puff, the ground cracked. One terrifying and ferocious beast after another emerged. In front of Bufong and you, the black smoke gathered. Soon, it turned into a human figure. Chapter 1528. No one had expected that these changes would occur when they were so close to the heaven god's treasure. Pitch black energy rose from the ground, wrapped around their bodies, and covered their legs. Then, as if a blade had cut through them, one god king after another was cut in half, their blood splattering for hundreds of meters. King Tianlong was so excited that he thought he was about to get a great opportunity. However, before he could step into the area, he felt a terrible aura invade his body, causing it to explode. He was filled with despair. He never thought that he would lose his life before he could get the great opportunity. A long, narrow tongue shot out and pierced his soul, which was fleeing in panic. His soul was torn to pieces in an instant. What are these things? It's those savage beasts. Wretched creature. Run. These savage beasts are too scary. The god kings were so frightened that they hurriedly retreated. Of course, some high-grade god kings were fearless. They swept across the area with a crushing posture, trying to push these creatures away. However, when a blade shot out, the darkness was cut in half. A high-grade god king was cut in half. In the void, darkness suddenly condensed and transformed into the figure of a woman. It was a woman whose arm had transformed into a black armored blade. "This is really interesting," she said with a smile. Her tongue licked the blood on the knife, and an immersed expression came over her face. "It's so delicious. The flesh and blood of these creatures are so delicious." Soul 9 sucked in a deep breath, and the insect scales on her armor blade slightly relaxed. She watched as countless experts were killed or wounded by the soul demons. She felt a surge of joy in her heart. Sure enough, Soul 13 is smart. Follow him, and you will have meat to eat. The attack of these creatures was beyond everyone's expectation. However, not all god kings were killed. Some experts retreated behind Bufong and the others. Tai Fei narrowed his eyes, revealed himself, and looked at Bufong in the distance. He was no stranger to Bufong. When he was weak, he met this human. Unfortunately, at that time, he was not confident that he could kill him. Instead, this human chef stuffed many human delicacies into his mouth. That incomparably disgusting thing had cast a shadow over his heart. When he saw Bufong, he seemed to recall the indescribable pain in his heart. Now that he was strong, this human must become his food. He wanted to chop this human into pieces, inch by inch. Of course, that was only if he obtained the cursed goddess body. That was a body that could allow one to become a soul overlord. He absolutely could not give up. "It's you." Bufong also recognized Tai Fei. After all, Tai Fei's appearance hadn't changed much from before. "Long time no see. I missed you." Tai Fei grinned. His hair fluttered in the wind as a black aura slowly emerged from his body. He had no patience for Bufong, because whenever he saw Bufong, he would think of those disgusting human delicacies. "Looks like your appetite has improved a lot. Are you still anorexic? I have food here," Bufong said expressionlessly. Tai Fei's eyes suddenly turned crimson. "You are courting death." "Soul 9, Tai Fei roared. In the next moment, the woman who forced back several high-grade god kings all by herself appeared beside Tai Fei. "The way I see it, you must really want to obtain the heaven god's treasure, right? What a pity. The treasure is behind me. If you have the ability, go and get it." Tai Fei sneered. He didn't hide his killing intent towards Bufong at all, and the scarlet color in his eyes expanded. Insect scales immediately grew on his skin, and in an instant, Tai Fei had turned into a ferocious beast. a vicious beast with 4 pitch-black bone spears on its back. I smell a very delicious smell on this human, the woman said. She stared at Bufang as if she was looking at a huge delicacy. He was still a little confused. Of course, she was much more clear-headed now. Frowning, she looked at the woman and Tai Fei. The creatures that had appeared made her feel a little disgusted. Moreover, they wanted to attack Bufang. He didn't put nethery in his eyes. "Do it," Tai Fei said. He gave the order. Immediately, the countless creatures on the ground soared into the sky as if they had stepped on springs. Terrible killing intent exploded out in an instant, pressing toward Bufang. Of course, some of them rushed toward the heaven god's treasure. For these creatures, the treasures of the heavenly gods that could attract many human experts were the best bait. If they could control the bait, it would be a great opportunity for them. Rumble. One after another, the ferocious beasts burst out. They roared, and their eyes were filled with savagery. Soon, the savage beasts approached the heaven god's treasure. The god kings in the distance all looked desperate. They had never thought that the treasure would fall into the hands of these disgusting creatures. If these creatures were allowed to grow stronger, it would be a disaster for humans. One of the creatures reached out his hand. His body was shrouded in black smoke. He was about to reach the edge of the heaven god's treasure. However, Buzz, the primal chaos energy in the heaven god's treasure, began to rise and fall. Soon, the approaching creature was instantly flattened with a bang. It turned into a pile of remains and scattered on the ground. The creatures that approached were all flattened. Bam, bam, bam. One after another, living beings perished. It was a terrifying scene. No one had expected that there would be such great danger around the heaven god's treasure. However, everyone quickly came to an understanding. Great fortuitous opportunities were definitely accompanied by great dangers. There was no such thing as a free opportunity. The human god kings were somewhat glad. If they were the ones who approached, they would undoubtedly be crushed into mincemeat by the terrible energy. However, these creatures were not stupid. Soon, he understood the danger that lay ahead. They retreated and looked warily at the heaven god's treasure. It's a pity that King Tianlong was blinded by the opportunity. How could it fall into someone else's hands so easily when even His Majesty could not get it? It doesn't make sense if the heaven god's treasure has no defensive power. King Pingyang sighed. He was a good friend of King Tianlong, but he could not persuade him, so he could only watch him die in vain. Even if he did not die in the hands of those disgusting creatures, he would die under the heaven god's restriction. It was just like the ancient heaven god's seal the divine chef temple had obtained. The heaven god's treasure was also protected by a restriction. The chaotic energy that burned like flames should be the key to breaking the array. If no one could get the chaotic energy's approval, the array would never be broken. Tai Fei and Soul 9 turned their heads. The heaven god's treasure was not essential to them. What they cared about was a good bait. Now that they could not get the bait, they could only kill this guy with brute force. Tai Fei walked on the void at a very fast speed. Before long, he was looking down at Bufang from a high vantage point. His eyes burst into a crimson light. Soul 9 moved as well. She was wielding an extremely sharp knife. She wanted to kill Bufang with one strike. This blade grew in her body and was her best friend. Swish! Soul 9 appeared in front of Bufang. The armor knife swept across. With a slash, it cut off a strand of hair. The strand of hair fell to the ground. Tai Fei sneered. A black aura spread and enveloped the entire area. Countless experts looked horrified. They found that the space was sealed, and they could not escape. Bufang had the law of space, but it was a little difficult for him to pass through the black aura. And the process was enough for Soul 9 to kill him 100 times. Slash! The spear on Tai Fei's back shot up into the sky. It tore through the sky and sped toward Bufang. Its target was Bufang's head. Their current target was Bufang. As for you, Yu's cursed body was what they longed for. Yu hovered next to Bufang. Seeing that Bufang had become Tai Fei and Soul 9's target, a ghostly green light flashed and disappeared. In the past, she did not have enough fighting strength. Now, she could feel the explosive power in her body. She had enough fighting strength, so she naturally wanted to help. The Bone Spear and Soul 9 arrived in front of Bufong almost at the same time. Soul 9 looked like a woman, but her eyes were full of madness. Her knife was her hand. The knife slashed fiercely. It went straight toward Bufong. Die. Become my Soul 9's food. The woman screamed, her face twisting. With a slash, the bone knife slashed down, getting closer and closer to Bufong's face. Suddenly, a fair and tender hand reached out from the side. She grabbed the bone knife. It was Soul 9's bone knife. Soul 9 froze and glanced at you. She was indeed a curse goddess. She could even heal a wound of this degree. Bufong looked expressionlessly at you. He was a little curious about Yu's power now. If Bufong was right, the dead woman should have helped you awaken the power in her. Now Yu is a real curse goddess. Get out of here, Soul 9 said coldly. The bone knife in her hand disappeared, and when it reappeared, it was in the other hand. With a slash, the bone knife bypassed Bufong's hand and slashed down at Bufong's head. Unfortunately, she did not have a chance to succeed, because, hovering in the air, you grabbed Soul 9's knife. The ghostly green curse power slowly spread and seeped out along her palm. Hiss! Soul 9's bone knife began to emit white smoke as it began to corrode. The cursed goddess's strength was still as usual. Did you ask for my permission to kill Bufong? You said indifferently. As soon as she said that, her eyes glowed green. Behind her, the cursed snake slowly condensed, opened its mouth, and let out a hiss. Soul 9's eyes narrowed. You gently waved her fair arm. The next moment, the cursed snake swooped down. There was a loud bang. It opened its mouth, bared its sharp fangs, and swallowed Soul 9 in one gulp. No matter how many tricks Soul 9 had, she could not even transform into a monster. In the cursed snake's abdomen, Soul 9's body slowly melted and became flat. Finally, it disappeared completely. The cursed snake ferocity, no, it should be used, was beyond everyone's expectations. Tai Fei's eyes turned red as he watched Soul 9 die in an instant. He was furious. He did not expect that you could still burst out with such power after losing the dead woman. She had killed Soul 9 in an instant. You floated up and landed on the cursed snake's huge head. Her eyes were indifferent as she glanced around. With me here, who dares to touch? Bufong? Chapter 1529. You are not the dead woman, so she could not unleash the full power of a curse goddess. But even so, it was still able to kill Soul 9 in an instant. This level of strength was indeed shocking. Although Soul 9 was not as strong as him, she had slaughtered a great world to advance to the next level. Tai Fei, for example, was actually called Soul 13. In the Soul Demon race, he was now a numbered Soul Demon, and above that was a Soul Overlord. According to his calculation, a numbered Soul Demon was almost equivalent to a human high-grade God King. However, the Soul Demon race had a huge advantage, and that was that they could imitate the divine abilities and techniques of humans. Of course, they could not imitate the power of laws. However, this was not a hindrance. The Soul Demons came from the Soul Realm, also known as the Soul Demon Universe. In that universe, the Soul Demons were the supreme existences. They also had their own talents. Humans had their own laws, and the Soul Demons had their own powerful means. They could fight against the laws of humans. In fact, there used to be humans in the Soul Demon universe, and they even started a war to fight against the Soul Demons. Unfortunately, they all became food for the Soul Demons in the end. Humans were their food, and since they dared to fight back, they naturally had to be exterminated. Therefore, from then on, the Soul Demon race was the only one left in the Soul Demon universe. You hovered in midair. The cursed snake stuck out its tongue and floated around her. Its scales shone brightly, making it look extremely beautiful and dazzling. You are very domineering now. After fusing with the dead woman's power, she has become the strongest expert in this part of the world. Even Bufong may not be as strong as you for the time being. The cursed goddess does not need to comprehend the loss. Even you, who has become a demigod, does not comprehend the laws, but her own curse power. Perhaps, for the curse goddess, the curse power is similar to the laws. All hail Nethery, Sister Nethery. Bufong could not help but clench his fists when he saw how domineering you was. He liked the feeling of lying down. With you around, he could lie down in peace. The crowd down below was also awed by Yu's domineering aura. Summer and Luo Sanyang's eyes narrowed slightly. Luo Sanyang's eyes dimmed. She felt a little defeated. Compared to Nethery, the gap between her and Nethery was just too big. Perhaps this was the so-called gap. Tai Fei, or rather, Soul 13, was furious at this moment. He had experienced countless difficulties to grow into a numbered soul demon. How could he be defeated like this? He had to seize the cursed goddess's body. It was the opportunity for him to become a soul overlord, so he could not afford to fail. Boom! Tai made his move. His body was instantly covered with insect scales. This made his aura even more vigorous. Buzz, his eyes were bloodshot as he stared at you. You furrowed her brows and curled her red lips. Then, she slapped the void toward Tai Fei. Rumble, the sky was trembling. The cursed snake turned into a huge snake that blotted out the sky. It opened its mouth wide and lunged at Tai ferociously. It's useless. I'm much stronger than Soul 9. Tai Fei said coldly. His scarlet eyes were fixed on the cursed snake. It was as if there was an array swirling under his eyes. Soon, Rumble, monstrous black gas spread out from his body and continuously condensed behind him. Soon, it turned into a huge pitch-black python. Its shape was somewhat similar to the cursed snake. This is the soul demon's ability to imitate. Can it even imitate Yu's cursed snake? Bufong's eyes flashed. Many people down below cried out in alarm. No wonder the Divine Emperor said these creatures are terrifying. Their abilities make my hair stand on end. Bam! The two giant snakes collided in midair. Each represented the ultimate power, and they were crashing into each other. Terrible rumbles rang out incessantly, and the ground trembled. Heaven and earth seemed to fall silent at this moment. Bufong landed on the ground. I watched you fight. I should let you fight this battle herself. This is Yu's first battle since your awakening, and she needs it very much. Tai Fei's eyes were filled with madness. The cursed goddess. She is the perfect vessel. In the distant void, Lord Go held the heaven god's bone and watched indifferently. He did not make a move, and he was too lazy to do so. To you now, Tai Fei is nothing. Buzz, he walked with graceful cat-like steps. Lord Go's figure disappeared into the void. When he reappeared, he was at Bufong's side. Oh, that gave Bufong pause. He turned to look at Lord Go. Lord Go's aura had grown stronger. Clearly, his strength had improved significantly. The void was torn apart. A figure shrouded in mist emerged. It was none other than the mysterious number 1 on the God King list. When Bufong looked at this person, he felt that he was somewhat familiar. However, even Bufong felt a little afraid of the other party's aura. Let Nethery fight over there. We can take the heaven god's treasure now, Lord Go said. He stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. His eyes were filled with excitement. Clearly, there was something in the treasure that excited him. The number 1 on the God King list was not very excited. There's a heaven god seal outside the treasure. It won't be that easy to get it, the figure said. Who are you? Lord Go gave the number 1 on the God King list a sideways glance. My identity is not important. What's important is the trust we've cultivated and the friendship we've built through trials and tribulations together. You can call me Lord Bird, the man said. Lord Bird? Lord Bird? Why did the number 1 on the God King list have such a strange name? He must be a weirdo. Bufong thought for a moment and did not pay too much attention to him. Bufong's eyes lit up as he stared at the array around the heaven god's treasure. Let Lord Go do it, Lord Go said. The next moment, he walked out with elegant cat-like steps, holding the heaven god's bone. In the distance, Tai Fei and you were fighting fiercely. Bufong, Lord Go, and the others were preparing to attack the heaven god's treasure. The closer they got, the more they could feel the powerful aura that enveloped the heaven god's treasure. It was an aura of destruction. All kinds of power of the laws were swirling around. Lord Go held the heaven god's bone. The next moment, his figure changed. His chubby, petite figure grew bigger in an instant, as if he had turned into a giant beast. The heaven god's bone also fused with Lord Go's paw. 3 dog heads appeared, their eyes shining with a blazing light. The paw slapped out. It smashed at the seal, so violent. The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched. Is this the way Lord Go said to break the array? Breaking the array with violence won't work. Lord Bird was somewhat speechless. Bu Fong could even feel his disdain, shrouded in a hazy mist. Rumble. Lord Go, who had transformed into a 3-headed earth prison hound, was enormous, surrounded by burning earth prison flames. It was as if he was going to burn the void into nothingness. His claw descended and smashed into the formation with a loud bang. A loud rumble rang out. Inside the array, energy burst out. Lord Go's paw had fused with the heaven god's bone, and it even showed some of its innate power. As soon as the paw fell, the array rumbled. It seemed like it would explode at any moment. Breaking the array with the heaven god's bone, after pondering for a while, Bu Fong's eyes lit up. Then he clasped his hands behind his back and took a step forward. He raised his Tao Tai arm, and the 3 supreme laws of the universe swirled over his head. Soon, they gathered on his fingertips. Buzz? His thumb glowed with divine light, then pressed down on the array. In the distance, many people took deep breaths. Bu Fong and the black dog were about to break the array. Could they really break the array that belonged to a heaven god? Previously, many god kings had been crushed by that formation. They were instantly killed. The array's power was not weaker than the power of a heaven god. Was it really a good idea to break it by force? Many people were not optimistic about Bu Fong and Lord Go. After all, it was a restrictive array, and it was very dangerous. If they attacked so casually and were killed instead, the loss would outweigh the gain. In the distance, the battle between Tai Fei and you had reached a white-hot stage. It was extremely terrible, and the rumbling kept ringing out. Tai Fei jerked his head around and saw Bu Fong and Lord Go, who were breaking the array. His eyes flashed fiercely. Don't even think about it, he roared. He raised his hand. The remaining 3 bone spears on his back shot out at high speed, heading toward Bu Fong, Lord Go, and Lord Bird. They wanted to stop the 3 of them. Lord Go, who had transformed into a giant dog, glanced sideways at the incoming bone spears. Then he opened his mouth and barked. A deafening roar rang out. The bone spear was immediately bounced off and flew backward. Lord Go moved his paw sideways, slapping it toward Tai Fei. I didn't provoke you, and yet you still dare to provoke me. Lord Go. Terrible earth prison flame swept out and burned fiercely. Boom! Lord Go's paw swept across the sky. For a moment, it seemed to destroy heaven and earth. Tai Fei's expression changed dramatically. He raised his arms, which were covered in insect scales, to block the paw. Boom! The paw fell with a deafening boom. Tai Fei felt a great force exploding toward him, which made him feel a little desperate. The insect scales on his arms shattered in an instant. His body seemed to be crushed, and black blood flowed from his mouth and nose. Tai Fei's pupils constricted. What kind of dog is this? Lord Go's paw hadn't fallen yet. The paw tightened. It grabbed Tai Fei's body. Then, it slammed hard on the ground. Bam! The entire ancient heaven god's relic seemed to shake. The ground shook violently. The ground cracked, turning into a huge fissure that stretched across the sky. Boom! 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 Tai Fei, who was caught by Lord Go, kept falling to the ground, looking miserable. You stopped what she was doing. She hovered in midair. The cursed snake coiled around her, sticking out its forked tongue. You looked at Tai Fei, who was being ravaged by Lord Go's paw, with a strange look in her eyes. Tai Fei had underestimated Lord Go. Was Lord Go an ordinary dog? The power unleashed by the paw, which had fused with the heaven god's bone, was unprecedented. It seemed that she didn't need to do anything. Slash! Tai Fei was swept away and smashed to the ground. He looked miserable. He couldn't believe that he had been abused by a dog. All the insect scales on his body had shattered. His flesh was almost smashed into a pulp. He fell limply to the ground, unable to move. He was furious, but he felt powerless. Lord Go snorted disdainfully. The next moment, he thrust his paw again. Tai Fei, who had been smashed into a pulp, was smashed into the ground again. Boom! The ground shook. Everyone's heart skipped a beat. Right at this moment, the eyes of Bufong, who was breaking the ancient heaven god's seal, lit up. The array is broken, Bufong said. His voice rang out. The hearts of all the people in the relic who were attracted by Lord Go's trick trembled, and they all turned to look at Bufong. Lord Go's nose twitched. Buzz, in that brief moment of inattention, a plume of black smoke darted out of the paw and fled frantically into the distance. Of course, Lord Go was too lazy to pay attention to the appearance of the black smoke now. He had been slapped back to his most primitive form by Lord Go's paw. Soul, 13, must be feeling very aggrieved. He never thought that a dog could be so ferocious. Crack! Crack! The ground shook violently. Bufong retreated at high speed and landed in the distance. He looked at the heaven god's treasure. There the array was slowly peeling off like lotus petals. It revealed the true heaven god's treasure hidden within the spell formation. Chapter 1530. Rumble. A rumbling sound rang out, and the entire ancient heaven god's relic seemed to tremble at this moment. Dazzling light erupted, becoming the focus of countless experts. Everyone's eyes were fixed on that spot. The array where the heaven god's treasure was located was broken, and the secret was exposed to everyone. Buzz, a strange fluctuation spread. It was the power of the laws that belonged to the heaven god, as well as the complete heaven god's bones that had finally appeared. Tai Fei was blown to pieces. The Lord Go had smashed him to pieces with his paw. This was beyond everyone's expectations, and many people were surprised by the Lord Go's current strength. They wondered what level the dog had reached. Of course, Tai Fei was not dead yet. He had turned into a wisp of black smoke, burrowed into the ground, and fled. Some people noticed this, but they did not have the time to chase after him. Their target was the heaven god's treasure. Compared to the fleeing Tai Fei, they were more concerned about the heaven god's treasure. This was the reason they came to this world, and now they were finally about to touch the true secret of this world. It was as bright as a lotus flower, sparkling and translucent. Beams of light shot into the sky, bursting forth to the extreme. The aura of a heaven god spread, making people gasp. A heaven god was a very powerful level. It was a terrifying level that made people's hearts palpitate. Those buried in the ancient heaven god's relic were all heaven gods who had died in battle. Heaven gods were said to be immortal. So many people wondered where these heaven god bones came from. Of course, some people thought they came from the war of the heaven gods in ancient times. Although heaven gods were immortal, that was because they could not be obliterated in the long river of time. Battles could still lead to the death of heaven gods. No matter what, none of this had anything to do with Bufong. His breathing was a little rapid. What he needed to do was to devour and burn the laws that belonged to the heaven gods with the divine flame. As long as he succeeded, his temporary task would be completed. He would obtain the fruit of law and awaken another supreme law of the universe. The eyes of Lord Bird, who was shrouded in mist, also lit up slightly. Obviously, he was also very interested in the heaven god's treasure. Of course, no one would not be interested in it. This was especially true because there was a stream of primal chaos in the treasure deposit. That was the foundation of becoming a heavenly god. Lord Go's figure shot out at lightning speed. The moment the formation was activated, he flew toward the treasure. His target was the primal chaos chi. He didn't care about the other laws. The heavenly god had already fallen. Those laws were not of much use to them. However, the chaotic energy was different. That was the key to achieving the heavenly deity realm. Only those who obtained it would have a chance to break through to the heavenly god realm. If he missed this opportunity, he didn't know how many years he would have to search for it. Every single era, the chaos verse would give birth to a stream of primordial chaos energy. However, that primal chaos aura disappeared in a flash, and it was too difficult to obtain. It was far from being as convenient as the primal chaos aura that was right in front of him. Moreover, the primal chaos energy that appeared once in an epoch could easily become a target of contention for the great divine dynasties. It was too difficult to seize the chaotic energy from the divine dynasties, god emperors, and god kings. Bufong's eyes flickered as he followed behind Lord Go. His goal was different from Lord Go's, so there wouldn't be too much conflict between them. No one knew what Lord Bird's goal was. Bufong and Lord Go ignored him. If Lord Bird also wanted the primal chaos aura, he would have to compete with Lord Go. If Lord Bird wanted the laws, why would ordinary people want the laws of these fallen heavenly gods? There was no way Bufong would let him have them. Bufong's speed was very fast, and he sped away in an instant. In the distance, the god kings' hearts were burning with passion again. These were all heavenly gods' treasures. Many people exchanged glances. They could see the excitement in each other's eyes. One by one, they rushed out and joined the fight for the treasures. For a moment, countless experts shot forward and rushed into the heavenly gods' treasures. Their goal was not the power of the laws or the primal chaos aura, but the heavenly gods' bones and blood. To them, these things were the real treasures. Bufong hovered in midair. Frowning, he stared at the two blood-colored skeletons down below. They were the heavenly gods' bones, and they were complete. Once the fusion was successful, he could even create the body of a heavenly god, and his fighting prowess would soar. However, Bufong had a feeling that the heavenly gods' bones were exuding a strange aura. These two heavenly gods' bones were very different from the heavenly god's fingerbone that Bufong had once obtained. Forget it. I'll devour the heavenly god's laws first. With so many laws, I should be able to fill the divine flame this time. Bufong thought to himself. Then he raised his hand and gently rubbed his index finger and thumb together. A crackling sound rang out. A ball of silver flame suddenly burst out, burning in Bufong's palm. He flicked his finger. Bufong flicked the flame out and sent it flying toward the dense power of the laws down below. The law energy below, the ownerless object, drifted about aimlessly, creating all kinds of mysterious colors, dazzling one's eyes. However, although it looked dazzling, it was useless to the others. This kind of power of the laws could not be absorbed by the fleshly body, and it could not become the power of the laws that they comprehended. It was not as useful as the heavenly gods' bones and blood. Rumble. A gust of wind swept across the place. The silver divine flame suddenly burst into light and began to devour the power of the laws. Wisps of the power of the laws plunged into the silver divine flame, burned, purified, and turned into pure energy that poured into the flame. The divine flame had already devoured a lot of laws. Now, as it devoured more and more laws, its power grew stronger and stronger. Of course, because of the limitation of Bufong's strength, the divine flame's power could not make a qualitative leap. However, its power was already extraordinary. 2,500 laws. Bufong was lost in thought. Many of the laws were repeated, and the divine flame would not devour them again. Therefore, the further one progressed, the more difficult it was for the divine fire to grow after it devoured the nomological laws. 2,900 laws, 3,000 laws. Yeah, it's still growing. Bufong's eyes flashed, and his breathing became rapid. He was very excited. Yes, he was excited. He could feel the divine flame's power increasing rapidly. Besides Bufong, who was harvesting, in the distance, the others were also crazily plundering resources. The Lord Go headed toward the primal chaos energy. He needed it. From the beginning, the Lord Go's target was the primal chaos energy. The God Kings approached the heavenly gods' bones. They attacked the heavenly gods' bones. After all, no one would want to give up the heavenly gods' bones. That was why they fought over them. The heavenly god's blood and the heavenly god's bones had become their main targets. Crack! A god king plucked out a heavenly god's bone, and he immediately let out a wild laugh of joy. He was filled with boundless joy. Someone obtained a bottle of heavenly god's blood. Without hesitation, he opened the seal and began to devour it. Everyone had their own personalities and expressions. They looked somewhat twisted and ugly. Very quickly, the divine kings had finished dividing them up. The heavenly god's bones were scattered all over the ground. Every god king was holding a heavenly god's bone, kneeling on the ground, immersed in a strange atmosphere. Sizzle, the divine flame was burning. Countless laws were being absorbed. Bufong didn't know how many laws the divine flame had absorbed. Finally, the divine flame was full. It stopped absorbing. It completely turned into silver light and returned to Bufong's palm. Like a child who had eaten and drunk to its heart's content, it remained motionless. Congratulations to the host for completing the temporary task. The task reward will now be issued. The system's serious voice echoed in his head. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched slightly. Sure enough, the task was completed without any mishaps. However, Bufong wasn't in a hurry to check the task reward. Instead, he dropped it. The brilliant power of law was absorbed by Bufong, and then all disappeared. What remained were the experts who held the heavenly god's bones and drank the heavenly god's blood, kneeling on the ground. This scene made people's hair stand on end. In the distance, you were hovering in midair. Summer, Luo Sanyang, King Pingyang, and some experts who didn't participate in the battle all turned pale. No matter how stupid they were, they knew that there was something wrong with the heavenly god's bones and blood. Lord Go approached the chaotic energy. The closer he got to it, the more he could feel its terrible power. It was an aura that came from the chaotic energy. Lord Go's eyes flashed. All three of his heads burst into divine light. He opened his mouth, bared his sharp canine teeth, and barked. He sped away. The chaotic energy fluctuated, and a wisp of it seemed to crush the void. However, Lord Go was fearless. He opened his mouth and lunged at the wisp of chaotic energy. His mouth expanded, blotting out the sky in an instant. Then he bit down and devoured the chaotic energy in an instant. Rumble. The area around the chaotic energy kept collapsing. Lord Bird ignored the chaotic energy. He was slowly walking through the heaven god's treasure trove. He didn't care about the laws, the heaven god's bones, or even the chaotic energy. He was walking slowly in this place. He seemed to be looking for something. No one knew what he was looking for. Finally, Lord Bird's movement stopped. Standing on the sand, he squatted down, reached out his hand, and dug the sand. Not long after, a mound of sand was dug out. Lord Bird took out an object from a mound. Slowly, he pulled it out. Swish! The sound of liquid colliding rang out. Bufong's face froze as he landed on the ground. He turned his head to look at Lord Bird. There, Bird Grandpa actually took out a wine flask from a mound. It was a wine pot made of jade. The wine in the wine pot flowed continuously. "Oh, I found it," Lord Bird said happily. One could imagine his face shrouded in mist at this moment. He was absolutely delighted. He had waited for so long for this wine pot. He seemed to sense Bufong's gaze. Lord Bird held the wine pot and waved it at Bufong. "Do you want a cup?" Lord Bird asked. Bufong glanced around. The strange atmosphere and Lord Bird, who had invited him to drink, Bufong hesitated. It didn't seem good to drink in this kind of atmosphere. Moreover, this wine was dug out from the burial ground of an ancient heaven god. Wouldn't there be a problem? "Don't worry. This wine is fine." Lord Bird seemed to sense Bufong's hesitation, so he burst out laughing. He waved his hand. A table and 2 chairs appeared in front of him. There were 2 wine cups on the table. Lord Bird grabbed the wine pot. He reached out and patted it. Immediately, a rumbling sound rang out like the waves of the sea. Bufong didn't say anything. He clasped his hands behind his back expressionlessly. He came to the table. The atmosphere was strange, but Bufong pulled out a chair and sat down. With a wave of his hand, he pushed the wine cup forward. Lord Bird laughed. He gave Bufong a meaningful look. Then, swish, swish, The turbid yellow wine poured out of the wine pot into Bufong's cup. The wine was still swirling in the cup. Lord Bird smacked his lips. This wine, just one cup, will make me feel like an immortal. Chapter 1531. The situation is so complicated. Is it really okay for us to drink? Bufong picked up the wine Lord Bird had poured and glanced at Lord Bird, whose face he couldn't see clearly. It was amazing that Bufong couldn't see through the mist with his current strength. This meant that Lord Bird's strength was above his. The wine cup in his hand was very ordinary. It wasn't a cup made of natural treasures. In fact, drinking wine wasn't that big of a deal. Some people like to use porcelain cups, some like pottery cups, and some even like to use bowls. It all depended on personal preferences. While everyone was fighting desperately for the opportunity, Bufong was drinking with a guy whose face he did not know. Bufong didn't think this was good. If the wine wasn't good, Bufong would leave without looking back. Let's drink, let's drink. This wine is rare. Lord Bird, shrouded in mist, said with a smile. Well, how can there be no food when there's wine? Why don't you make a dish to go with the wine? Lord Bird asked, looking at Bufong. Bufong's eyes narrowed slightly as he drank and ate in this strange environment. This Lord Bird was also a strange person, Bufong thought. However, a black wok had appeared in his hand at some point. Obviously, Bufong agreed with Lord Bird's suggestion. If there was wine, there would naturally be dishes to go with it. As for what dish to go with the wine, Bufong knew what to do. Lord Bird wasn't in a hurry to drink. Instead, he looked at Bufong with interest. He wanted to see what kind of dish Bufong would bring out. Ordinary dishes that went well with wine were not worthy of his wine. Lord Bird's mouth twitched. He was probably the only person in the entire chaotic universe who knew about this wine. It didn't have a name, but it couldn't be underestimated. The wine jug was filled with the marks of time. When it swayed, it was as if there were waves crashing. It was very terrifying. The wine was full of sediment. It wasn't just the sediment of the wine's fragrance, but also the sediment of time. This jug of wine had been buried since ancient times. It was definitely extraordinary. It was full of history. Therefore, the seemingly ordinary jar of wine was not ordinary at all. Otherwise, these two ancient heavenly gods wouldn't have chosen to die here. Lord Bird straightened his back and squinted at Bufong. He exhaled and stared at Bufong. Bufong wanted to make a dish to go with the wine, although the current environment and atmosphere were not suitable for cooking. However, sometimes cooking depended on one's mood. When good wine was in front of them, it would be a form of blasphemy if they drank it dry. Master Bird had already told Bufong that the wine was good, although Bufong hadn't tasted it yet. Based on his years of experience in brewing, he could tell at a glance that this wine was extraordinary. It was a fine wine that had already restrained all its ostentatiousness. Plop! Bufong entered the heaven and earth farmland. When it came out again, it was grabbing two huge ears. He scraped off the dragon scales on his ears and cleaned them. Bufong wielded the dragon bone kitchen knife and began to process the dish. These were the Thunder Dragon's ears. The Thunder Dragon was a top-grade blood beast king, a top-grade god king existence. As a food ingredient, it was the best. Bufong had eaten the dragon leg, but there was still a lot of dragon meat left in the heaven and earth farmland. Dragon ears. Lord Bird froze for a moment, then became more and more interested. A good dish to go with the wine would sublimate the wine. He hoped that Bufong could make a delicious dish that would make him immersed in it. The dragon bone kitchen knife spun in Bufong's hand. Nowadays, Bufong's knife skills had long been shocking. Cutting a dragon ear was a piece of cake for him. In a short while, the dragon ear was cut into shreds. Then he piled them on the stove. The spring of life poured into the black turtle constellation wok. Bufong's cooking was as smooth as moving clouds and flowing water, as if he was dancing. After the dragon ears were put into the wok and blanched, he began to process them. Gurgle. Steam rose, accompanied by a meaty aroma. Although it was just boiling water, it couldn't hide the aroma of the dragon ears. He fished out the dragon ears. Then he put them into a huge blue and white porcelain pot, poured ice cubes, and began to cool them down. On the other side, Bufong began to process the other ingredients. He took out the spirit fruits and spirit vegetables from the heaven and earth farmland. He cut them into shreds, patted the purple garlic, and mixed them into the blue and white porcelain pot. The spices fluttered, and the sauce was sprinkled. After cooling the dragon ears with ice cubes, he fished them out. Then, he poured them into the porcelain pot. He began to stir. His stirring speed was very fast. The dish in the pot was tossed by Bufong like a wok. Bufong's wok-tossing technique had reached a very proficient level after the inheritance. In a short while, he thoroughly mixed the sauce, seasoning, and ingredients with the dragon ears. Every bit of flavor seeped into the dragon ears. Is he making a cold dish? Lord Bird looked pensive. It was indeed good to use cold dishes to go with wine. Lord Bird wasn't too surprised that Bufong would choose to make a cold dish. Swish! Bufong poured the dish out of the porcelain pot and into a blue and white porcelain plate. As the soup flowed, it looked splendid and beautiful. Dragon ears with jade glaze. Done. Bufong put away the black turtle constellation wok and the dragon bone kitchen knife. Then, he placed the dish on the table. Around them, the god kings were fighting for the heaven god bones. Some of them looked crazy, as if their divine senses were affected. Some of them had red eyes like mad dogs, biting anyone they saw. The atmosphere was very serious. Of course, when it came to Bufong and Lord Bird, they looked a little calm and strange. The style of the two was completely different. You're using a dragon's ear as a pig's ear. Interesting. Lord Bird smiled. He gave Bufong a deep look, then picked up his chopsticks. His chopsticks tapped on the table. Finally, he reached out, picked up a dragon ear, and put it into his mouth. Because the dragon ear had been cooled by ice cubes, it had become very elastic. Moreover, the meat was very chewy, and there were crispy bones in it. So, when it entered his mouth, it was quite refreshing. Oh, the thickness of the dragon ear is even, and the sauce has penetrated perfectly. It has almost penetrated every inch of the dragon ear. Not bad. Lord Bird's face was covered in mist, so it was hard to see. However, he was very happy to eat. He chewed with a crunching sound. The cartilage of the dragon ear, the sour taste of vinegar, and the delicious taste of many spirit fruits and ingredients. It was extremely refreshing when he ate it. Bufong didn't add any spiciness. Since the main point was to taste the wine, Bufong didn't want the spiciness to affect the taste. Bufong also reached out his chopsticks, picked up some spirit fruit pulp and dragon ear meat, and put it into his mouth. Both of them chose to eat first. Tasting his own dishes was Bufong's favorite thing to do. This time was no exception. Although the environment seemed a little unharmonious, Bufong still ate with relish. Come on, let's drink. Come on, let's drink. Lord Bird laughed. Bufong narrowed his eyes. Finally, he could taste this wine. Bufong narrowed his eyes. Finally, he could taste the wine. Bufong also raised his wine cup. His hand shook. His hand shook. The wine cup didn't move. Facing that wine cup, it was as if he was facing a towering mountain. This small cup of wine weighed millions of pounds? Bufong's pupils constricted when he saw Lord Bird's effortless manner. Sizzle. Lord Bird held the wine cup. As the turbid yellow wine entered his mouth, the rich aroma of the wine rushed into his mouth, spreading in an instant. The rich taste instantly filled Lord Bird's mouth. This was a jar of wine from the distant past. It seemed to let people experience the changes of history and the precipitation of time. A mouthful of cold dragon ear, a mouthful of the distant past fine wine. Indeed, he was as happy as an immortal. Bufong exhaled. Black and white energy seemed to flash on his taut eye. Arm Bufong steadily picked up the wine cup, even though it weighed millions of pounds. Holding the wine cup, he first put it in front of his nose, shaking it and sniffing, feeling the aroma of the wine. It was a strange smell. It wasn't as fragrant as Acheron's helplessness, but it had its own unique smell. Bufong couldn't describe that smell. It was as if a small hand was touching his heart. It was like the taste of time. The taste of time. Holding the wine cup, Bufong's eyes lit up. Holding the wine cup, his lips touched the cup. It was a soft feeling. The turbid yellow wine poured, flowing down the cup and into Bufong's mouth. Gulp. What? Gulp. 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 Bufong couldn't stop. Taking mouthful after mouthful, his Adam's apple kept moving up and down. As for the wine in the cup, he drank it all. Don't rush. Have a bite. Lord Bird held the wine cup with 2 fingers, smiling at Bufong as if he had expected Bufong's reaction. Bufong glanced at Lord Bird. Reaching out his chopsticks, he picked up some cold dragon ears and put them into his mouth. Slurp. Lord Bird happily filled up Bufong's cup. Shortly after, the wine in the cup became heavy again. Bufong picked it up, drinking in 1 gulp. Gulp. The wine was finished again. Bufong picked up more food. Drinking wine, eating food, drinking wine, eating food. Bufong was a little glad that he was the one who cooked the dishes. Only the dishes he cooked could match this wine. At this moment, Bufong had already tasted the wine's flavor. That's right. This wine didn't have any heaven-defying effect, such as making people break through with 1 sip. However, after drinking this wine, it could cleanse one's soul, allowing one to feel the changes of the ages and the vicissitudes of time. It was as if this wine had been buried deep in the ground, and countless years of loneliness had been tasted. You can feel it now, right? Food must have its own characteristics, and the chef needs to cultivate it carefully, whether it's this wine or the dishes. Your dishes are good, but compared to this wine, they seem empty. Many famous dishes have their own history and stories. Lord Bird laughed. Bufong seemed to feel that sharp gaze. However, Bufong was immersed in Lord Bird's words. Who the hell was this Lord Bird? Bufong lifted his head, feeling a little shocked. Since he could say that, could he be a chef? Oh, you're here. Lord Bird turned his head, looking into the distance. Bufong also took a deep breath, turning his head to look. Instantly, his eyes shrank. There, those experts who fought for the heaven god's blood and bone, they were all dead. Bufong didn't notice it just now, but now he turned to look. He was shocked to find that those experts who had fought for the heaven god's bone had all turned into bones on the ground. It was as if they had been abandoned by time. Bufong opened his mouth. His pupils constricted. Crack! Crack! The heaven god's bones that were scattered on the ground began to make noises, slowly assembling. They took on the appearance of skeletons. Under Bufong's horrified gaze, wisps of blood appeared on the surface of the skeletons, which gradually spread to the flesh and blood soon. They filled up and turned into 2 corporeal human figures, a man and a woman. The man was handsome, wearing a loose robe, and his hair was tied up. He looked no different from an ordinary person. The woman was beautiful, and her hair was tied up in a bun. She looked like a pretty daughter from a humble family. The 2 of them held hands, smiling warmly as they looked at each other, their eyes filled with love. They turned to look at Bufong. Then, they walked toward the table. Bufong sucked in a breath of cold air. Had the ancient heaven god come back to life? Hey, Bufong boy, do you know what this wine is called? Lord Bird suddenly asked, giving Bufong pause. Right from the beginning to the end, Lord Bird has never said the name of this wine. This wine is called the husband and wife wine. It was brewed by this heaven god couple. Back then, they dominated the chaotic universe and killed countless experts. They were invincible. In the end, when they died, they did not leave behind any heaven god's secret treasures or peerless divine weapons. They only brewed a jar of wine. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That's why this wine is the greatest treasure in this remnant. Chapter 1532. Who was Lord Bird? How did he know about the husband and wife wine? There were many things that puzzled Bufong, but Lord Bird did not explain to him. After drinking the husband and wife wine, perhaps we will become husband and wife, Lord Bird said with a cheeky grin. Bufong's face darkened. What the hell? He's not serious, is he? He glanced at the heaven god couple, who were sitting opposite each other with their tables raised, and his face grew slightly serious. Is this husband and wife wine a trap? Lord Bird burst out laughing when he saw Bufong's darkened face. His laughter was filled with the urge to hold back his laughter. Even if you agree, I won't. Why is the heaven god wine the greatest treasure in this relic? because only by drinking the heaven god wine will you gain the approval of these two heaven gods and the chance to fuse with the heaven god's bones. Lord Bird said. He pointed at the two heaven gods. Bufong couldn't help but look over and saw the heaven god couple who had drunk the heaven god wine. Their bodies had turned into tiny crystals and were dispersing. In just a few moments, they were gone. The situation was so strange that Bufong's pupils constricted. After drinking the heaven god wine, the fetters in their hearts have been lifted. Now, you can fuse with the heaven god's bones. Lord Bird said. He rose to his feet, gave Bufong a deep look, then clasped his hands behind his back and shook his head as if he was humming a ballad. Bufong's expression became extremely strange. Suddenly, he felt that the ballad was somewhat familiar, but he found that Lord Bird, who was humming the ballad, had disappeared without him knowing. Like a drifting immortal, he disappeared in a flash. He just carried the seemingly inexhaustible wine of husband and wife and left. Buzz on both sides of the table, the two heaven god skeletons were emitting sparkling energy. Bufong glanced at them. His heart thumped. Immediately, the heaven god skeletons flew slowly toward Bufong. The Taotai arm in his hand seemed to be summoning them. Buzz. Before long, the heavenly god's bone seemed to be emitting specks of bright light, which enveloped Bufong's body and merged into Bufong's body. Then it turned into a huge golden cocoon and wrapped Bufong inside. Once Bufong broke out of the cocoon, he would completely transform. Rumble. The entire ancient heaven god's relic rumbled. Now that the heavenly god's treasure had been found, the heavenly god's relic had lost its purpose. Of course, although there were still a few scattered bones of gods, there was no longer any need for these god kings to remain in the god's ruins now that the main treasures had been found. In the distance, Luo Sanyang, Xia Xia, and the others looked at the golden cocoon and couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. You floated in the air. Her body was surrounded by a dark green light, which made her aura even more vigorous. Let's go, we should go back, King Pingyang said. This trip to the ancient heaven god's relic had made him understand what it meant to be strong. He found that he was really getting old. The emissaries of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were also shivering. The terrible god mentioned by the shy divine emperor did exist, and the high-grade god king who led them had fallen in the relic. Because of his greed, Feng Wuji was a little down. This time, he had seen a real genius. Bufong's fearlessness had completely shattered his confidence. Could a demigod really do this? He had comprehended 3 supreme laws of the universe and could fight the top-grade god kings on the god king list. This genius was a little unreasonable. Even their crown prince was probably a level weaker than Bufong. Feng Wuji took a deep breath. He suddenly didn't want to go back to the immortal spirit divine dynasty. He was very curious about what kind of environment could give birth to such a genius. He looked at the golden cocoon. Bufong was wrapped in it. Once he broke out, he would surely reach a higher level. At that time, Bufong might be stronger than he was now. The emissaries of the immortal spirit divine dynasty left, led by King Pingyang and the few remaining high-grade god kings of the Shai divine dynasty. They left the ancient heaven god's relic. What happened in the relic this time was a nightmare for many people. Innumerable experts and high-grade god kings had perished as well. For the Shai divine dynasty, it was really a disaster. However, the emissaries of the immortal spirit divine dynasty did not dare to have other thoughts. Now that they had touched upon such a secret, the Shai divine emperor would not let them leave easily. What they had to think about now was how to survive in front of the divine emperor. Buzz, the teleportation array, was spinning. Although great changes had taken place in the relic, fortunately, the array leading to it was still intact. A warship, covered with sharp edges and exuding an ancient aura, appeared. The door opened. Many people walked out of it. Luo, Sanyang, Summer, and the geniuses who survived the emissaries of the immortal spirit divine dynasty. Many experts sensed the sky. It was as if a lifetime had passed. They almost thought they would not survive. Whether it was those terrible blood beast kings, the battle of god kings, or the attack of terrible gods, They all made them feel like they were going to die at any time. Fortunately, they were very weak. It was because they were weak that they did not attract the attention of others. They looked up at the sky of the Xiai divine dynasty's capital and took deep breaths. But soon, everyone's expression changed. They felt that something was a little different. The capital of the Xiai divine dynasty seemed to have changed. They raised their heads and stared straight at the sky. They could see terrifying energy surging in the sky. It seemed like there was a terrifying attack coming from beyond the starry sky. What is that? The faces of Luo Sanyang and the others froze. They spread their divine senses, trying to find out what was going on. Soon, they found that the capital of the Xiai divine dynasty was already in a state of chaos. King Pingyang's expression changed dramatically. Could it be His Majesty? King Pingyang guessed. However, he had no time to say anything else. He sped away, turned into a stream of light, and flew toward the palace. He hoped that what he had guessed was not the truth. Luo Sanyang and Summer looked at each other, frowning. Summer also stepped into the air and flew toward the palace. Luo Sanyang thought for a moment, then headed toward the Luo family. In the palace of the Xiai divine dynasty's capital, the majestic palace was heavily guarded at the moment. Inside, the black armor guards, the silver armor guards, and the powerful gold armor guards were patrolling. They were surrounded by layers of guards, making the palace impenetrable. Outside the royal palace, many ministers stood with their hands by their sides. Their faces were filled with anxiety. The crown prince's face was unsightly. Standing in front of the palace, his expression flickered. When King Pingyang and the others arrived and landed in front of the palace, many ministers turned to look at them, but they were too lazy to say anything. What happened? Summer asked, looking directly at the crown prince. The crown prince took a deep breath and then exhaled, looking a little helpless and dispirited. Father's calamity has begun. The crown prince's face was extremely unsightly. The other ministers also had looks of despair on their faces. The divine emperor was the pillar of the Xiai divine dynasty, a top existence who made the dynasty awe-inspiring in the starry sky. If he did not survive the calamity, it would be a great disaster for them. No, it would be a great disaster for the entire Xiai divine dynasty. The mighty Xiai divine dynasty might fall apart. It would become the prey of the immortal spirit divine dynasty and the Titan divine dynasty. After all, the crown prince could not support a divine dynasty with his current strength. The hundreds of millions of living beings in the divine dynasty and many great worlds might be involved in a terrible war. Impossible. With the suppression of Bu Fang's dishes, why did the divine emperor's calamity come ahead of time? Summer frowned, a little puzzled and puzzled. The divine emperor said that Bu Fang's dishes could suppress the calamity. Could it be false? I don't understand. You don't understand. A few days ago, a meteor streaked across the night sky, and the stars bloomed with purple light. That's when the divine emperor's calamity came. The ministers were also desperate. They were not very strong, and they could not help the divine emperor with his hell calamity. Summer's face was extremely pale. Although her affection for the divine emperor was much fainter, he was, after all, her family. Once the divine emperor failed to survive the calamity, he would die. Father is a worthy man, and heaven will help him. He will never fall in the calamity. He is a man who will become a heaven god, said the crown prince. In the past few days, he had become much older. Perhaps he understood the pressure he would have to bear after the divine emperor's death. Even though he had comprehended two supreme laws of the universe, his strength was only that of a demigod, and it was difficult for him to support half the sky. In the distance, the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty looked at each other. They did not expect that such a great change would happen in the Xiai divine dynasty. This was really not a small matter. The arrival of the Xiai divine dynasty's calamity was a major event for the entire chaotic universe. It was a major event that could change the pattern of the chaotic universe. Rumble. A rumbling sound rang out, and an oppressive aura spread, making everyone present feel a little depressed. It was an aura that seemed to come from beyond the nine heavens. Everyone looked up at the sky. A great terror was descending in the starry sky. In the starry sky of the Xiai divine dynasty, it was a mess, and debris was drifting all over the place. Warships had turned into scraps and exploded in the starry sky. Corpses floated feebly in the air, and the blood of god kings drifted in the air. The whole starry sky seemed to be filled with sorrow and a suffocating aura of death. In the distance, on a broken star, a gigantic creature knelt on one knee on top of it. It was 100,000 feet tall, and its aura was extremely powerful and terrifying. But at this moment, black smoke was coiling around the creature's body. Damn it! The Titan Divine Dynasty's glory is still here. Roar! The giant raised his head, revealing the bones on his face. He let out a roar, his blood splashing across the starry sky, and his eyes turned red. Taishan's aura fluctuated. Looking at the dark creatures piled up in the vast starry sky, he felt only despair. His heart was even more sorrowful. It never occurred to him that he would be ambushed on this trip, and it was an ambush by these strange creatures. Even someone as powerful as the Titan Divine Emperor could not withstand these creatures. Were these the terrible creatures the Xiai Divine Emperor mentioned? They were really terrifying. They were the ones who had suffered losses on both sides. Although he had suppressed those creatures, the Titan Divine Emperor was already at the end of his life. Carefully, Taishan spread his huge palm. The Titan Divine Emperor's shrunken body was sitting cross-legged on it, surrounded by a powerful aura. However, there was a hint of weakness in that aura. This won't do. I have to take the Divine Emperor out of this ambush. Damn it. Are the people of the Xiai Divine Dynasty all blind? I can't believe a battle like this can attract the Xiai Divine Emperor's help. Taishan coughed up blood. The blood he coughed out was like a waterfall. Buzzed in the distance, the twisted black creatures slowly gathered. Their auras were evil and powerful, as if they did not belong to this world. Soul One, don't let them get away. It's not easy for us to find such high-quality food, said a numbered soul demon, looking ferocious and terrifying. The black smoke spread and turned into a human face. The Titan Divine Dynasty's Divine Emperor is an existence who already has the body of a heaven god. Occupying his body is enough for us to break through to the Soul Overlord realm. Soul One's face twisted as he laughed evilly. The next moment, the starry sky exploded, and the stars seemed to tremble. These soul demons attacked one after another. They approached Taishan. Taishan's eyes turned red. Blue veins bulged all over his body. He slapped Xing Chun, who was beneath him. Then, he grabbed it and threw it at those creatures. As for his figure, he was fleeing at high speed. He was fleeing toward the Xiai Divine Dynasty's capital. He had no choice but to run. He wanted the Divine Emperor to live. However, he could not escape in the end. These creatures were too disgusting and horrible. They turned into dark arms and wrapped around his body. Taishan roared furiously. He used his fleshly body to fend off these creatures, then threw the Titan Divine Emperor in his palm toward the Xiai Divine Dynasty. He wanted to buy some time for the Divine Emperor to recover. Boom! A great battle broke out in the starry sky in an instant. Suddenly, barbaric glyphs burst out from Taishan's body. It exploded. Chapter 1533. The chaotic energy was very important. At least, for Lord Go, it was his only purpose in entering the ancient heaven god's relic. Now, the chaotic energy had been completely devoured by Lord Go. Lord Go had transformed into a fat dog, carrying the heaven god's bone on his back, and his eyes gleaming brightly. He came over with graceful cat-like steps, and before long, he landed in front of the cocoon that wrapped Buffon. Looking at the golden cocoon, it seemed to be constantly transforming. Lord Go yawned. The chaotic energy did not taste good, much worse than Buffon's sweet and sour ribs. However, After eating the chaotic energy, Lord Go was undergoing subtle changes. So he was too lazy to go out of the relic, so he just lay in front of Bufang's cocoon. The man and the dog were both undergoing subtle changes. This change might be very unusual. Rumble. The sky above the Xiai Divine Dynasty's capital exploded. It blew a hole in the sky. A figure shot out at high speed and smashed hard to the ground. The impact caused a cloud of smoke and dust to rise. The Titan Divine Emperor closed his eyes, and the barbaric glyphs on his body kept swirling as if to bind his fleshly body. He was none other than the Titan Divine Emperor, who was thrown here by Mount Tai from the starry sky. The whole mountain was flattened. The Titan Divine Emperor was a god emperor-level expert, and his cultivation base was exceedingly high. His fleshly body had even reached the level of a heaven god's body. If so many evil creatures hadn't used their strongest means to destroy his divine sense and seriously injure his spirit sea, he wouldn't have been in such a miserable state. Although god emperors were strong, those evil creatures had slaughtered too many great worlds, so their fighting prowess and cultivation base had also reached the level of god emperors. Perhaps they were still a little weaker, but with so many evil creatures, the Titan Divine Emperor was still suppressed. Terrible barbaric glyphs swirled around his body, each of them seeming to weigh 10,000 kilograms. As they fell, the void crumbled. Even though he was seriously injured, a god emperor was still terrifying. This scene was so similar to that of the Xiai Divine Emperor. The Titan Divine Emperor's eyes trembled. He slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with anger and sorrow. Although he was in a deep slumber, he knew what Taishan had done for him. So many elites of the Titan Divine Dynasty, including his little friend Taishan, had fallen in the hands of that evil creature. Everything that Xia Yuha, that old fellow, had said was actually true. This type of creature could devour experts to increase its strength and replicate divine abilities. It was simply a devil. This kind of demon must not be allowed to spread. Furthermore, the Titan Divine Emperor could clearly sense that those creatures did not seem to be from this world, because he had never seen such a creature. He exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. The energy in his body was boiling. Suddenly, the Titan Divine Emperor's pupils constricted. He abruptly looked at the void behind him. Over there, the void was torn apart. A wisp of black chi shot out like a thread and shot toward the Titan Divine Emperor. What is that? The Titan Divine Emperor was furious. Although he was seriously injured at the moment, his majesty was still there. No ordinary creature dared to approach him. The wisp of black chi moved very fast, and its familiar aura made the Titan Divine Emperor's pupils constrict. I can't believe it chased me all the way here. The Titan Divine Emperor's pupils constricted, revealing his endless anger. Those evil creatures are still the same. Why are these creatures so haunting me like ghosts? He was furious. The Titan Divine Emperor was furious to the extreme. Rumble. The Divine Emperor raised a hand and immediately captured the wisp of black chi. The black chi struggled in it. Soul 13 was full of resentment. He wanted to occupy the cursed goddess's body, but he was killed by her instead. This damned cursed goddess. There would come a day when he, Soul 13, would completely devour it. He had escaped from the ancient heaven god's relic. However, he did not expect to encounter a severely injured god emperor here. His aura deeply attracted Soul 13's attention. However, although he was seriously injured, he was still very strong. He could not believe that he had been captured. The black aura struggled, and slowly it changed its appearance. Oh! The Titan Divine Emperor's pupils constricted. He looked at the changing black chi and saw that it had taken the form of a human face. It was Tai Fei's face. What? Tai Fei? The Titan Divine Emperor froze. As he looked at his son's face, his mind wavered for a moment. Rumble. It was at this moment that Soul 13 moved. He broke free from the Titan Divine Emperor's imprisonment, broke open a rift, and shot toward the Divine Emperor's glabella at high speed. Bam! The black chi exploded. It turned into a beam of black light and seeped into the Titan Divine Emperor's body. Buzz, the Titan Divine Emperor's face kept struggling and twisting. His mind was seriously injured, and at this moment, an evil creature had burrowed into his spirit sea. "This is bad." A ripping sound rang out. The void of the Xiai divine dynasty was torn apart. One evil creature after another floated out of it. They took on the appearance of a young man, a young girl. "Oh, it's that Titan Divine Emperor." Soul One's eyes lit up. There was a look of greed in his eyes. He was now only half a step away from breaking through to the Soul Overlord realm. As long as he fused with the Titan Divine Emperor's body, he would be able to do so. At that time, he would dominate this world. The whole chaotic universe would become his paradise. Soul One let out a long howl. He turned into a cloud of black smoke and rushed crazily toward the Titan Divine Emperor, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground with his head bowed. He approached at high speed. Suddenly, the Titan Divine Emperor, who had his head bowed, raised his head. Black smoke was spreading in his eyes. A sneer came over his face. "Soul One," a hoarse voice burst out of the Titan Divine Emperor's mouth. Then, he raised his hand and turned it into a claw, on which insect scales sprouted. A ripping sound rang out. Soul One, who had turned into a cloud of black smoke, was instantly imprisoned. He kept struggling. You. Soul One transformed into a face and struggled incessantly. "You didn't expect that I, Soul 13, would be one step ahead of you, did you?" A hideous grin came over the Titan Divine Emperor's face. Then he opened his mouth, revealing a terrifying, ferocious arc. Then the Titan Divine Emperor stuffed Soul 13, who was struggling, into his mouth. Slowly, he closed his mouth and bit down. Slash! Soul 1 immediately stopped struggling. In the distance, Soul 2, Soul 3, and the other numbered soul demons, who had slaughtered several great worlds, were shocked. Soul 13? He actually devoured Soul 1? He had occupied the Titan Divine Emperor's body. Could it be that Soul 13 was going to become a soul overlord? Rumble. Sure enough, the next moment, a terrible aura spread out of Soul 13's body. He's really going to evolve into a soul overlord. Many soul demons trembled in fear and respect. Once a soul overlord was born, the numbered soul demons, would have to obediently become Soul 13 subordinates. All of you protect me. When I become a soul overlord, it will be the time for us soul demons to slaughter this chaotic universe. Soul 13 said in an eerie voice, his lips black. Also, the Xiai Divine Emperor's great tribulation is coming. Soul 2, Soul 3, you two go and occupy his body. With that, our army of soul demons will surely have one more soul overlord. The graceful woman and the indifferent young man cupped their fists. Then they turned into streams of light and sped toward the Xiai Divine Dynasty's capital. The other soul demons turned into wisps of black smoke and swirled around the Titan Divine Emperor's body. Even the void was twisting. There was a great terror brewing in it. In the Xiai Divine Dynasty's palace, a creaking sound rang out. The gates of the palace opened. The Xiai Divine Emperor was clad in a simple robe. His face was full of vigor, which was very different from how he looked in his twilight years. He wore the Divine Emperor's crown, and his eyes shone brightly. His robe was neat and spotless. Even his old face seemed a little younger at this moment. Gold armor and black armor stood outside the door. When they saw the Divine Emperor, they cupped their fists respectfully. "Your Majesty." Black armor and gold armor bellowed respectfully. Their faces were filled with excitement, and their bodies seemed to be trembling slightly. "All right, black armor and gold armor, you have guarded me for 10,000 years. Today, I'll give you a holiday. If I survive the tribulation, I'll confer you the title of king," the Divine Emperor said with a faint smile. "Your Majesty, we don't need to be conferred the title of king. We only hope that your Majesty will return safely." Gold armor knelt on the ground and cupped his fists. The skin on Black Armor's face was trembling as he followed Gold Armor's movements. The Divine Emperor smiled faintly. He had watched Gold Armor and Black Armor grow up. They had grown from a small child to the commander of the Imperial Guards who could take charge of an area by themselves. He treated them like children. The Divine Emperor looked up. His eyes seemed to see through everything and saw the anxious people outside the palace. Summer, King Pingyong, the ministers, and the heads of the aristocratic families were all waiting anxiously. The Divine Emperor's face grew serious. He had expected the tribulation, but when it really came, he found that there were still many things he had not prepared for. He sighed. With his hands clasped behind his back, his aura towered into the sky. At this moment, he was no longer suppressing his aura. The majestic aura that belonged to the Divine Emperor spread out, looking down on the world. In the depths of the starry sky above the ninth heaven, a great terror was approaching. Rumble. The Divine Emperor's face was serious. Dressed in a neat robe, he stepped into the starry sky step by step, as if he was compressing the air. Tribulation. Let me have a good look at it. How terrible is the so-called heaven god tribulation? The Divine Emperor's eyes burst into divine light. At this moment, the old man slowly became younger. From an old man, he turned into an elegant young man. He was just like the shy Divine Emperor, who had suppressed the chaotic starry sky. Day turned into night. Everyone jerked their heads up and saw a terrible vortex appear in the sky. The vortex continued to spin like a bottomless black hole. The Divine Emperor hovered in the sky, standing in front of it. He looked like a small boat in a vast sea. It was as if he would be sucked in at any moment. The Divine Emperor's might was supreme. Gold Armor and Black Armor both knelt on the ground. This was the indomitable and invincible Divine Emperor in their hearts. Summer looked at them with a complicated look in her eyes. The courtiers knelt as well. All the people in the divine capital knelt. In midair, 2 plumes of black smoke spread and turned into Soul 2 and Soul 3. He's so strong. Compared to the Titan Divine Emperor, this shy Divine Emperor is almost half a step into the heaven god realm. He's simply terrifying. This old fellow should be the strongest of the 3 divine emperors in this chaotic universe. They looked at each other, both feeling frightened. The heaven god tribulation made them not dare to go up there rashly. Let's wait. When that old fellow fails, we can rush up and seize his essence. Soul 2 and Soul 3 had made up their minds. Xiaoyu's eyes were deep as he looked at the huge black hole and took a deep breath. The next moment, the tribulation had broken out. Xiaoyu felt an explosion coming from the depths of his body. It was as if something terrible was about to come out of his body. The so-called tribulation was extremely terrifying. Puff, puff. Bone spikes extended from his body one after another. In an instant, he was unrecognizable. The tribulation had finally begun to break out. In the ancient heaven god's relic, Crack, the golden cocoon, which was quietly sitting there, trembled slightly. Lying outside the cocoon, the Lord Go opened his eyes, yawned, and stared at it. A crack appeared on the top of the cocoon. The next moment, it spread. With a ripping sound, the cocoon shattered. A jade-like palm reached out of the cocoon. The Lord Go's eyes widened. Chapter 1534. Crack, crack. The golden cocoon was the crystallization of energy, which was condensed after the energy had solidified to a certain extent. However, its essence had been absorbed by Bufang. At this moment, the cocoon was as crispy as a pancake. With a gentle pat from Bufang, it broke. The cocoon broke completely, revealing Bufang's figure. Bufang was wearing the vermilion robe. He looked refreshed, as if he had just taken a bath. He seemed to have grown taller, but he was still skinny. His long hair was tied up with a velvet rope. Overall, he hadn't changed much. If one had to point out a change, perhaps his temperament was different. Lord Go stared at Bufang. Bufang, who had just broken out of the cocoon, had become more restrained. Of course, in Lord Go's eyes, Bufang's cultivation base was still trash. Because Bufang was still a demigod, even though he had fused with the heaven god's bone, he hadn't grown much. Bufong was still holding a heaven god's bone in his hand. It was the female heaven god's bone. Bufong thought for a moment. With a thought, he put it into the heaven and earth farmland and buried it under the heaven tree. He had fused with the male heaven god's bone. If he left the female heaven god's bone here, it would be the same as separating the husband and wife. It wasn't a good thing to separate a pair of lovers. Burying it in the heaven and earth farmland might be the best choice. Because the farmland was inside Bufong's body, it wouldn't leave. Lord Go smacked his lips, looking at Bufong from head to toe. Although Bufong's cultivation base hadn't improved by a lot, Lord Go could feel that Bufong's body contained a terrifying power. It was the power that the heaven god's bone had given to Bufong. Kid, you fused with the heaven god's bone. Once you break through and become a god, you'll have the body of a heaven god. Incredible, incredible. The Lord Go said, by the way, you've already comprehended 3 supreme laws of the universe. Don't you plan to become a god? Lord Go asked doubtfully. This was not only his doubt, but also the doubt of many others. Could it be that Bufong boy wants to comprehend 5 supreme laws of the universe? Such a crazy idea. It was indeed a little terrifying. Bufong looked at the Lord Go and nodded, which meant that he agreed with the Lord Go. This made Lord Go curl his lips. Young man, don't bite off more than you can chew. Supreme laws of the universe are things that can only be found by luck. The Lord Go said. Bufong nodded expressionlessly. It was something that could only be chanced upon and not sought. Bufong rubbed his chin. Let's wait until we leave this ruin before eating the law fruit. He wondered what kind of supreme law of the universe he would comprehend after eating the fruit of law this time. The remaining supreme laws of the universe were time and life. After eating the fruit of law, he should be able to comprehend one of the time and life Tao laws next. Right? I still need to cook a dish from the God of Cooking's menu. The system seemed to have given me a hint, but I rejected it. I'll be busy after I leave the ruin. Bufong exhaled. In fact, he just wanted to sit on the recliner in front of the restaurant, bask in the sun, and live a leisurely life. How comfortable that would be, cooking, basking in the sun, and teasing the Lord Go from time to time. Wouldn't life be wonderful? Unfortunately, the road to becoming a god of cooking was not so smooth. He had to make a breakthrough eventually. Let's go. There's nothing left to miss in this ancient heaven god's ruin. The Lord Go said. Bufong nodded. The next moment, Bufong raised his jade-like palm. After fusing with the heaven god bone, the other effects were not obvious, but his skin had become much fairer. Swoosh! The law of space erupted, and a spatial rift appeared in front of him. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bufong slowly walked into it. Holding the heaven god bone, the Lord Go also walked into the rift with his elegant cat-like steps. Slash! Slash! What was a calamity? Before this, no one knew. All they knew was that it was extremely terrifying. It was the means by which the will of the universe wanted to punish those existences who had touched the barrier. The shy divine emperor hovered in midair. He felt that his body was about to explode. He had formidable strength, but he could not use it. Slash! Bone spikes shot out from his body, riddling his body with thousands of holes. It was an extremely hideous sight. Is this a calamity? Is this all you've got? The shy divine emperor sneered. Even as blood spurted in the sky, he was still smiling. In the sky, the huge black hole was spinning as if there was a great terror swirling in it. The divine emperor was fearless. He lifted his hand and brushed it over his body, causing the bone spikes to explode one by one. Down below, everyone's bodies were trembling. Their hair stood on end. After flattening the bone spikes, the divine emperor stared at the huge black hole with bright eyes. He was fearless and only looked forward to the arrival of the calamity. How terrible was the calamity that had tortured him for hundreds of years. Buzz! All of a sudden, the divine emperor felt as if his head was being pricked by needles, and the pain made his eyes turn red. It was a calamity that acted on his divine sense. It was as if his divine sense was being pierced by steel needles. The torture was no worse than being pierced by bone spikes. It was like the cruelest torture in the world. His roar rang out and spread across the sky, causing all the experts in the divine dynasty to be terrified. Rumble. A great terror emerged in the vortex. The next moment, in the dark vortex, slowly, the clanging sound of the cavalry rang out. Clang! Clang! In the dark vortex, dark clouds loomed over, and a terrible silence filled the air. Only the clanging of the cavalry could be heard. What was coming out? Many people looked up at the sky and took deep breaths. That was an army in the dark, an army made of the power of law. The sky was filled with terrifying laws. The divine emperor, dripping with blood, was stunned as he looked at the army. This army was just like the shy cavalry who had slaughtered countless great worlds when he was fighting in the chaotic universe. But now that he was in his twilight years, the calamity he was facing was actually the same cavalry he had been fighting with. Was he going to be killed by them? The shy divine emperor's eyes narrowed, and he let out a reluctant roar. Rumble. The cavalry roared and charged madly toward the divine emperor. He charged toward the divine emperor in a frenzy, and all kinds of law energy spread out. Rumble. Lightning gathered in the sky. At the same time, the power of law descended and turned into cavalry, charging at the divine emperor. In the blink of an eye, the divine emperor in the sky was covered by the cavalrymen, and his law filled the sea of people. Slash! The divine emperor bit his lip, his eyes filled with determination. He did not speak, but kept attacking. Every time he attacked, a group of cavalry would fall to the ground. However, these laws were immortal and indestructible. After being blasted, they would reform again. Once again, they drowned the divine emperor. Down below, gold armor and black armor's eyes turned red as they watched. They seemed to feel the divine emperor's helplessness. Damn it! Gold armor rose to his feet angrily, his eyes surging with fighting spirit. With a clang, he pulled out the knife at his waist. How can I let His Majesty fight the cavalry alone? Where are the gold armor guards? Charge into the sky with me. Gold armor was furious to the extreme. Kneeling on the ground, King Pingyong also felt his blood boil, and his eyes seemed to be bloodshot. He recalled the time when he followed the divine emperor to conquer the world. Roar! King Pingyong rose to his feet. With a thought, he took out a red-tasseled spear that he had sealed for a long time. It was a spear that His Majesty had given him. Today he would fight with His Majesty on the battlefield again in his old body. The eyes of the old courtiers in the capital were red, and they wished they could charge into the sky. Who cared about the calamity? In the distant void, Soul 2 and Soul 3 were shivering. This is the will of the chaotic universe. These stupid humans are actually planning to fight against the will of the chaotic universe. They're courting death. They will all be crushed to pieces, and then they will all become our food. Soul 2 and Soul 3 thought excitedly. Although the will of the universe terrified them, they could not help but swallow at the thought of food. Rumble. Gold armor could no longer hold back. Behind him, the 3,000 gold armor guards had gathered. Long roars rang out as one figure after another soared into the sky. Gold armor was the first to bear the brunt of the attack. Holding a golden sword, his golden armor glowed brightly. However, the moment he soared into the sky, the divine emperor, who was engulfed by the sea of laws, immediately fought his way out. His eyes narrowed. Then, he threw his palm down. Get lost, all of you. This is my calamity. Do you want to get involved in it? Do you have a death wish? The divine emperor bellowed, his voice exploding. Gold armor's chi and blood churned as he was slapped to the ground. With a boom, the ground exploded. Rumble. The divine emperor threw out a punch, blasting through hundreds of figures of laws. His aura fluctuated. He had created the heaven god fist, and he had once arrogantly thought that he was comparable to a heaven god. But now, it seemed ridiculous. Bam! 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 The divine emperor's eyes turned red, and he seemed to be somewhat lost in the slaughter. Soul 2 and Soul 3 were breathing black smoke, ready to make a move. They could not help but want to move. The Divine Emperor looked like an arrow at the end of its flight and would certainly not survive this calamity. While he was on the verge of death, they could devour his flesh and blood. Perhaps they could break through to the Soul Overlord realm. Soul 2 and Soul 3 looked at each other and saw the excitement in each other's eyes. "Let's go," Soul 2 said to Soul 3. Then, the two figures turned into black lines and shot toward the shy Divine Emperor. Their target was the Divine Emperor's forehead. Suddenly, in front of Soul 2 and Soul 3, the void was torn apart. A gentle figure walked out of it with a black dog strutting its cat-like steps. Oh, they seemed to sense a plume of black smoke shooting toward them at high speed. Bufong and Lord Go turned their heads slightly and looked at Soul 2 and Soul 3. "These are soul demons?" Bufong exclaimed softly. Lord Go's mouth opened slightly as he held the Heaven God's bone in his paw. "These disgusting creatures are really everywhere. Eat Lord Go's bone." Lord Go did not have a good impression of these creatures. Without saying a word, he was going to throw the bone at them. However, just as Lord Go was about to strike, Bufong moved. Bufong flicked his finger. His fingernail rubbed the pad of his little finger. Immediately, a silver flame shot out. Boom! The silver divine flame instantly turned into a divine dragon. It opened its mouth and lunged towards Soul 2 and Soul 3. Soul 2 and Soul 3 never expected that a figure and a dog would suddenly appear in front of them. The law of space indeed lived up to its reputation of being able to come and go without a trace. "A demigod? You want to fight us with just a little flame? Become our food," Soul 2 sneered. Naturally, he could see through Bufong's cultivation base. As for the dog, he was a little afraid of it. The black smoke surged, turning into a huge millstone that was about to crush them. However, it was a human demigod who was attacking them. A mere demigod could easily destroy them. He just needed to put out the fire and devour this man. If Soul 13 were here at this moment, he would definitely warn Soul 2. After all, Soul 13 had suffered too many defeats at the hands of Bufong. It was a pity that Soul 13 was not here. Under Bufong's control, the divine flame turned into a silver dragon. It slithered through the air. It opened its mouth. Roar! The roar of a dragon seemed to ring out. Soul 2 and Soul 3 collided with the silver divine flame. The next moment, Soul 2 and Soul 3's expressions changed. Chapter 1535. The silver divine flame was fused with the power of nearly 3,000 laws. Because Bufong had not become a god yet, its power had not improved substantially. However, the elemental might of the divine flame was not weak at all. As soon as Soul 2 and Soul 3 got close, they felt an extreme terror, which made them feel as if their bodies were twisting. The black air was twisting, trying to help them resist the divine flame. However, the moment they got close, the black air began to evaporate. "Oh, what is this?" Soul 2 and Soul 3's expressions changed, becoming very unsightly. Their faces, hidden in the black smoke, were distorted. "Break through. Break through this flame. Our target is that shy divine emperor," Soul 2 roared. The black smoke grew stronger and collided with the divine flame, producing a rumbling sound. A loud boom rang out. The flame spread in an instant. The silver divine flame turned into a silver divine dragon, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, roaring. In just a flash, Soul 2 was devoured by the divine flame. A sizzling sound rang out. Even his aura did not rise. How is this possible? Hansen was so scared that his soul almost left his body. He forcefully stopped moving forward. Soul 2's strength was not weak. To be able to become a numbered soul demon, their strength was extremely formidable. The human god kings were just their food. However, under the divine flame, Soul 2 was devoured before he could even struggle. Rumble! The divine flame surged. Without hesitation, Soul 3 turned around and fled. He did not dare to get close. The flame was terrifying and strange. Oh, running away? Bufong glanced indifferently at Soul 3, who was fleeing to the back. The divine flame's power was terrifying now. Originally, the black balls left behind by these soul demons were its great killing weapons. Now it was getting easier and easier to deal with these soul demons. Bufong waved his finger in the air. Then, he pointed into the distance. The divine flame burst out in an instant. It turned into numerous silver lotus flowers. The tiny fire lotuses spun and drifted quietly in the air. Under the control of Bufong's divine sense, they flew towards Soul 3. This is a human demigod. Damn it, how could he be so strong? Hun Sen was terrified. They knew that human demigods were like ants to them. They, who had just been born from the Black Sphere, were more than enough to deal with human demigods. However, he had never thought that he, who had become a titled soul demon, was actually forced to this point by a human demigod. The Lord Go's eyes flickered with surprise. This flame is interesting, the Lord Go murmured. He couldn't understand Bufong anymore. Bufong's methods were getting stronger and stronger. With such a strong foundation, it would be even more difficult to become a god. Lord Go exhaled. Looking at Bufong, who was standing by his side with his hands clasped behind his back, Lord Go felt nostalgic for a moment. When he first met Bufong, he was just an ordinary person who could cook well. However, as time went by, before he knew it, Bufong Boy had grown to the point where he could stand shoulder to shoulder with the Lord Go. In fact, Lord Go's bones could hardly hold down Bufong anymore. He was indeed worthy of being the man whom the Lord Go valued. He thought of how Bufong used to shout about becoming the god of cooking every day as a slogan. Now, it seemed that Bufong was very likely to become the god of cooking. Rumble. One fire lotus after another bloomed in midair. Soul 3 wanted to flee, but he could not. His escape space was constantly being compressed by the fire lotus. Damn it, Hun Sen had never imagined that he would actually come here to throw his life away. He was very angry. He had thought that was a good thing that Soul 13 had asked them to come here and occupy the Shai Divine Emperor's body. Now it seemed that this was simply a matter of courting death. Why wasn't he as lucky as Soul 13 to meet a seriously wounded and dying Divine Emperor? Instead, he met a strange demigod who was almost ascending to heaven. Rumble. Crushed by the divine flame, Soul 3 howled miserably, turned into black smoke, and dissipated into the void. With a boom, he completely exploded. The black soul demon, who had turned into the source, tried to flee. However, he was still burned into nothingness by Bufong's divine flame. Bufong's heart skipped a beat. The divine flame immediately flew back into his hand. It burned and spun quietly in his palm. As Bufong looked at the dancing divine flame, his eyes seemed to flicker. Rumble. In the distant sky, it was a dark mass, and a terrible war was breaking out. It was a war between the Divine Emperor and the Calamities. The Calamities had turned into armies, and their battle cries shook the sky. Bathed in blood, the Divine Emperor fought against thousands of enemies alone. This scene caused the entire heavens and earth to turn silent. Everyone quietly watched as an indescribable sorrow flowed in their hearts. Some of the old courtiers could no longer control the fighting spirit in them, and their bodies were trembling. They couldn't wait to rush up and fight with the Divine Emperor. The army formed by the laws was very lethal. Even the mighty Divine Emperor had been stained with blood by the raging power of the laws. After killing Soul 2 and Soul 3, Bufong and Lord Go turned their heads to look at the Divine Emperor, who was transcending his tribulation. The latter looked quite miserable. A heaven god tribulation. It was a great tribulation that the Divine Emperor had to transcend as he was about to reach the end of his life. If he could transcend it, he would have a chance to live and become a heaven god. If he couldn't, he would be annihilated. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and dust to dust. A heaven god tribulation is really terrible. Lord Go's dog hair is standing on end. Lord Go stuck out his tongue and said. Bufong nodded in agreement. The dense army was formed by the laws and was comparable to a corner of the sea of laws. This was not something ordinary people could imagine. Suddenly, Bufong's heart skipped a beat. Narrowing his eyes, he glanced at Lord Go, then at the divine emperor, who was bathed in blood and fighting wantonly in the distance. Those armies were formed by the laws, the purest power of the laws. So, Bufong glanced at the divine flame burning in his hand. It seemed to have sensed the cheers from the divine fire. Bufong pursed his lips. It was a bold idea, but it seemed feasible. The divine emperor used the heaven god fist. With every punch, he would smash a soldier formed by the laws into pieces. They turned into the purest energy and dissipated in the void. What he needed to do was to quietly devour these laws with the divine flame. Perfect. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched slightly. Then he flicked his finger. A small divine flame, which seemed to be about to be extinguished at any time, swayed and drifted toward the battlefield. The entire sky above the capital had turned into a boundless battlefield. The divine flame approached quietly. In front of the boundless battlefield, it was like a speck of dust. No one paid attention to the divine flame, except for Lord Go, who was at Bufong's side. Lord Go watched as Bufong flicked the divine flame. Lord Go's eyes widened as he looked at Bufong in disbelief. Bufong boy, are you crazy? That's a heaven god's tribulation, filled with karma. How dare you attack it? Do you want to be haunted by the tribulation? With your current strength, even a wisp of tribulation is enough to destroy you. This has nothing to do with your fighting prowess. Lord Go opened his mouth. His gentle and magnetic voice was full of anxiety. Bufong is crazy. The corner of Bufong's mouth curved upward slightly as he listened to Lord Go's words of concern. He reached out a hand and patted Lord Go on the head. It's fine, Bufong said. Lord Go widened his eyes and did not know what to say. Why are you so calm? You don't know how terrible this so-called tribulation is. Even someone as strong as the shy divine emperor was at the end of his rope in that tribulation. He was at his peak at the moment, and his strength was the strongest among the divine emperors of the 3 divine dynasties in this part of the chaotic universe. Even so, he was about to be tortured to death by the tribulation. How can you be so calm? Meddling in the tribulation? Bufong did not do it on purpose. He did it on purpose. Although the heaven god's power of law had raised the divine flame to a very powerful level, it had yet to be perfected. Fortune was sought in danger. If these tribulations could make the divine flame perfect, the attempt would be worth it. This was also the reason why Bufong was so determined to release the divine flame. It was a flame with 1 foot in the grave. It swayed and emitted a silver glow, like starlight in the night, about to be extinguished at any moment. Finally, the flame approached the tribulation. Xiao Yuhe did not care about the flame. In fact, he was not in the mood to pay attention to it at the moment. He threw out a punch. A terrible wave spread out, destroying heaven and earth. Countless soldiers were smashed into pieces by his fist. This was the heaven god fist. He once proudly claimed to be invincible under the heaven god realm, so he created it. He wanted to stand shoulder to shoulder with the heaven god. But now it was ridiculous. A mere heaven god tribulation had almost killed him. The so-called heaven god fist had become a joke. He panted violently, and his vision became a little blurry. The soldiers condensed of the laws were immortal. He had destroyed hundreds of them, but they were soon engulfed by tens of thousands of soldiers. He was a little powerless. The soldiers were blown up and turned into the primitive power of the laws. The power of the laws burst forth, trying to recover slowly. However, just then, a silver divine flame drifted over. It swayed and swayed. It wrapped around the power of the laws. Buzz, a spluttering sound rang out. The power of the laws did not condense into soldiers. Instead, it was absorbed by the divine flame. After absorbing a wisp of the power of the laws, the divine flame did not change much, and it flew toward the next one. It's done. Bufong's eyes lit up. The Lord Go's mouth twitched. The black vortex in the sky did not send down a terrible punishment. It was obvious that the calamity did not implicate Bufang. Bufang's gamble paid off when he took the risk to seek riches and honor. At this moment, under the Xiai divine dynasty's capital, the air was filled with sadness. The soldiers' eyes were red as they looked at the divine emperor in the sky, who never gave up. Even though he was covered and devoured by the countless soldiers, the divine emperor was still fighting bravely. They hated him. They hated that they could not rush into the battlefield with him and kill the enemies. King Pingyang's face was already covered in tears. He seemed to feel the divine emperor's helplessness. Not only him, but some of the old courtiers had already collapsed to the ground. The divine emperor was facing a tribulation, but they, the old courtiers, could only watch helplessly. How could they be courtiers? Summer fell silent. For some reason, she felt a little suffocated. Yu, on the other hand, watched calmly. She was not familiar with the divine emperor in the first place. Suddenly, Yu turned her head and saw Bufang and Lord Go hovering in the distance. Her mind flickered. Her aura fluctuated, and she came to the side of Bufang and Lord Go. The divine emperor fought bravely. One punch after another. He was as firm as a rock. He didn't want to die, and he didn't want to be defeated. All the people of the divine dynasty were watching. He couldn't let down the divine emperor's prestige. So, the divine emperor's eyes opened slightly, revealing a gleam of divine light. He felt that the pressure had lessened a lot. These soldiers of the laws were declining, or rather, they were no longer condensing after being shattered by him. The soldiers of the laws were dwindling, but he could still fight. There was hope. The divine emperor's eyes focused, and he let out an excited roar. Blast burst out. He exerted his cultivation base to the extreme. Inside the black vortex, rumbling filled the air. All of a sudden, divine light burst out. 5 streams of light shot out of it. The divine emperor felt the pressure suddenly increase. He sucked in a cold breath. Are these generals formed by the supreme laws of the universe? Rumble. A divine dragon slithered. A phoenix spread its wings. A turtle carried the starry sky on its back, and a tiger roared in the galaxy, and a qilin shook the firmament. At this moment, everyone held their breaths. The calamity had finally broken out. Oh! Bufang's eyes lit up, and he stared fixedly at the 5 existences. His breathing became much faster. These are the supreme laws of the universe. After devouring these 5 supreme laws, the divine flame will be perfected. Chapter 1536. Bufang looked at the generals transformed from the supreme laws of the universe rushing out of the dark vortex. His eyes gleamed as if he had seen delicious food. Of course, to the divine flame, these generals were the most delicious food in the world. As the master of the divine flame, Bufang naturally revealed its mood. However, the auras of the generals formed by the 5 supreme laws of the universe were extremely mighty and terrifying. Just by standing there, they seemed to be a great terror. A terrible pressure swept over. The divine dragon slithered in the sky, its scales reflecting dazzling light. Its body was tens of thousands of feet long, emanating a terrible aura. Rumble. A rumbling sound rang out. The divine dragon quickly shrank and turned into a human figure with a dragon head and a human body. The figure was clad in armor, and his aura was mighty. Holding a long halberd, he charged toward the divine emperor. In the distance, the phoenix also revealed her body and turned into a goddess of martial arts. Holding a spear, she threw it at the divine emperor from afar. That long spear seemed to have torn the sky apart, causing the sky to rumble endlessly. The spear flew straight toward the divine emperor, emanating a terrible aura. The divine emperor roared. Facing the 5 generals, his aura rose abruptly. His heart was surging. Perhaps this was the second stage of the heaven god tribulation. After this stage, would the tribulation be over? He would break through to the higher heaven god realm. The divine emperor roared. Clenching his fists, He threw them out toward the 5 terrible existences. Rumble, rumble. In the sky, the clouds crumbled and the void exploded. This great calamity. Everyone in the divine dynasty was watching it. Terrible fluctuations kept colliding and colliding. Bufang hovered in the distance, watching with bright eyes. Lorgo was also watching, and he couldn't help but be speechless. Bufang, on the other hand, was thinking about how to devour the 5 generals with the divine flame. Bufang had a feeling in his heart. The divine flame had devoured the laws of the heaven gods, but it still couldn't reach perfection. It had just devoured so many lost soldiers, but it still couldn't reach perfection. Perhaps what it lacked was these 5 generals. Bufang was eager to try. He was looking forward to the battle between the divine emperors. With a thought, his divine sense surged. The aged divine flame floated quietly in the air like a venomous snake waiting for the right moment to explode. The divine emperor's heavenly god fist grew brighter and brighter, his body bursting with infinite light. At this moment, the divine emperor really seemed like a high and mighty god. He did not use the power of law. He could only use his physical body to resist this tribulation. The dragon-headed general was crushed by the god emperor, and his body instantly exploded, turning into the pure power of laws that dissipated. However, the halberd swung out and slashed at the god emperor's body, leaving a huge gash on his body. Fresh blood gushed out of the wound. The divine emperor stood in the sky like a real god. After shattering the dragon-headed general with a single punch, the god emperor raised his hand and grabbed a spear. It was the figure of the Valkyrie that the phoenix had transformed into. If this emperor was still young, I would definitely take you in, help your husband, and teach your children. The divine emperor spat out a mouthful of blood and sneered. He leaped out. His fist struck the sky. The Valkyrie was instantly shattered. The 2 generals exploded at the same time. In the distance, Bufang's eyes lit up. Now, Bufang muttered. His divine sense turned into a storm, surging. Boom! The divine flame, which had 1 foot in the grave, shone with resplendent brilliance and radiance. It was like a silver dragon roaring in the sky. Roar! The divine flame spread toward the dragon-headed general and the Valkyrie, who were trying to recover. The flame turned into lotus flowers, sealing the void. The divine dragon emerged, and the phoenix spread its wings. The dragon and the phoenix struggled in the silver flame, trying to break free from the shackles. What is this? At this moment, everyone was shocked. This scene was completely out of their expectations. The divine emperor's eyes lit up, but he ignored it. His target was the turtle and the white tiger. The sky was shattered, revealing the starry sky. Every punch and momentum caused mountains and rivers to shatter. This was the divine emperor. The divine emperor whose power shook the world. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were shivering. They could not believe that they had tried to plot against such a peerless divine emperor. They were really crazy. Puff! The divine dragon melted, swallowed by the divine flame. The phoenix spread its wings and tried to escape. However, it was also caught by the divine flame and burned. The light of the divine flame was a little hazy. After swallowing the divine dragon and the phoenix, it looked like a child who had stolen a candy. The divine emperor was bathed in blood, and his face was no longer recognizable. He looked extremely miserable. He had really reached the point where he was at the end of his rope. How could he stop it? He couldn't stop it at all. The divine emperor's consciousness was heavy, but his back was straight. He was breathing, and as he inhaled and exhaled, a storm gathered. The white tiger and the turtle were also blown to pieces. They slowly converged in the distance. Under normal circumstances, the divine emperor should not have been able to survive. However, to his surprise, the divine flame devoured the white tiger and the turtle. This gave the divine emperor a chance. If the white tiger and the turtle were not devoured, they would recover and return to their previous appearance, which was extremely powerful. The divine emperor was already an arrow at the end of its flight and could not hold on any longer. The divine flame was twisting. After devouring the power of the white tiger and the turtle, it shone brighter and brighter. In the sky, Chelan stepped in the air, his roar resounding. Behind him, the boundless vortex seemed to be erupting with great terror. The divine emperor's hair was disheveled, and his eyes were filled with surprise. Stepping on a cloud, he charged forward. He and the divine flame seemed to have formed a tacit understanding. I'll smash them, and you devour them. Only in this way could he have a chance to survive the calamity. The divine emperor fought General Chelan. The battle tore the sky apart. The terrifying rumbling caused the void to tremble. The power to destroy heaven and earth made everyone shiver in fear. Finally, the divine emperor waved his fist and threw a punch, crushing the Chelan inch by inch. It completely collapsed into the power of the law. It's your turn. The divine emperor roared and coughed up blood in the sky. He stood towering like a pillar. The divine flame shot out, turned into numerous lotus flowers, and wrapped around the power of the law that the Chelan had transformed into. The Chelan struggled violently. The vortex in the sky also spun faster and faster. Rumble. However, the divine flame seemed to be the nemesis of these laws. The near-perfect power of the law devoured the divine dragon, phoenix, turtle, tiger, and Chelan. These represented the supreme laws of the universe. Finally, the divine flame calmed down. It floated and burned quietly in the void. The divine emperor stood still. The atmosphere suddenly became very quiet. Everyone looked up at the sky feverishly. Is it over? Is the calamity over? Has the divine emperor survived the calamity? Some people were so overjoyed that their bodies were trembling. It was a sign of joy and happiness. Gold Armor was wild with joy. He suppressed the urge to roar. The Xiai divine dynasty will live forever. The crown prince's aura exploded out of him. His aura fluctuated as if he was about to become a god. He watched as his father killed like a heaven god, and even the calamity could not do anything to him. He felt a surge of excitement. As the crown prince, he naturally needed to be invincible in the world like the divine emperor. The divine emperor had created a miracle. Since ancient times, many divine dynasties have been destroyed because the divine emperor could not withstand the calamity. But now, the divine emperor had done so. The divine emperor raised his heavy head and looked at the void. There, the vortex was spinning. Is the calamity over? Bufong was a little excited as he stared at the divine flame. The divine flame's aura had finally reached perfection. The great perfection divine flame was perfectly round, as if it had merged with heaven and earth. All it needed now was a fuse. That was Bufong. As long as Bufong became a god, the divine flame would certainly be sublimated and improved. This improvement would be invincible. The black vortex represented the calamity, and what was surging in it was extremely terrifying. Rumble. All of a sudden, thunder rumbled in the sky. There seemed to be lightning flashing in the black vortex. Like spears, the thunderbolts tore the vortex apart. The calamity had finally made its move. It could feel that it had been deceived. Someone was entangled in karma. If the divine flame was not a human and devoured some soldiers of the laws, the calamity would not matter. However, it devoured the generals transformed from the 5 supreme laws. This was a little too much. At this moment, the black vortex thundered as if the calamity was raging. The divine emperor looked up, and his expression changed. He had become old again, and his vitality seemed to be fading. He had become old again, and this was his true appearance now. The calamity was not over yet. The divine emperor felt a little bitter. Sure enough, the calamity was not so easy to overcome. The divine flame had helped him a lot, but it could not help him create a miracle. Who was the master of the divine flame? The divine emperor was not stupid. If the divine flame was not controlled by someone, how could it do such a taboo thing? Oh, suddenly, the divine emperor focused his eyes. He turned his head and looked into the distance. There, he saw the divine flame wrapped around Bufong's palm. He nodded at the Divine Emperor. The Divine Emperor had a complicated look in his eyes. It's him, the heir chosen by Mu Hongzhi to the Divine Chef Temple. The Divine Emperor breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, the expressions of both Bufang and the Divine Emperor changed. They looked up at the same time. They could see that the black vortex was getting bigger and bigger. Then, a terrifying aura spread out from the vortex. Only a wisp of that aura seeped out. It made everyone present feel extreme despair. That's right, despair. The Divine Emperor felt as if heaven and earth were pressing down on him. This is the might of a heaven god. The Divine Emperor was shocked, and his expression changed dramatically. There were only 5 heaven gods in the chaotic universe, and they represented the pinnacle of the 5 supreme laws of the universe. Although divine emperors were rare, some hidden god kings might have the power of divine emperors. However, the heaven gods have been fixed since ancient times. In fact, for many epochs, the identities of the 5 heaven gods had never changed. No one had ever been able to challenge their status. However, at this moment, the aura of a heaven god was truly emanating. The Divine Emperor had never seen a heaven god before. They lived in the depths of the chaotic universe. This was the first time he sensed the aura of a heaven god. It was vast, terrifying, and despairing. A black vortex appeared. It was being torn apart. The next moment, from within the vortex, a palm stretched out. It was a human palm. It looked like a woman's hand, slender, fair, and like the purest jade in the world. As soon as it appeared, it attracted the attention of everyone in the world. The Divine Emperor's body stiffened as he stared blankly at the palm. The palm did not go toward him. Instead, it went past him and slapped toward Bufang. It seemed to be angry at what Bufang had done. Chapter 1537. Oh, the palm, which was as translucent as white jade, passed the Divine Emperor and slowly slapped toward Bufang. Even the sky seemed to darken at this moment. The Divine Emperor frowned. He did not expect that the palm and the calamity would not be aimed at him, the man who was transcending the tribulation, but at Bufang. Was it because Bufang was the master of the divine flame? Was it because the divine flame had devoured so many soldiers and generals of the laws of heaven and earth? That was possible. Didn't that mean he had harmed Bufang? The Divine Emperor felt a little embarrassed. However, no matter how embarrassed he was, there was nothing he could do. The palm exuded the aura of a heaven god. A terrible aura spread, surpassing that of a god and crushing everything. Even someone as powerful as the Divine Emperor, the ruler of the Xiai divine dynasty, could only feel despair in the face of this heaven god's palm. Yes, despair. He could not resist it. For a moment, he even thought he was going to die. It was a heaven god's palm. Not only was the emperor god stunned, but the other experts were also dumbfounded. The aura of a heaven god had appeared in the calamity. The heaven god even threw out a palm himself just to kill Bufang. Was this the price of being involved in the calamity? Bufang felt his breath catch in his throat. He felt like he was suffocating. He felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. He had never felt this way before, because the vermilion robe gave him the invincibility effect, and the system could weaken the enemy's pressure. Therefore, Bufang was not affected by the pressure at all. But this time, the pressure from the owner of the palm terrified Bufang. Even the pores on his body shrank. It was extremely terrifying. Beside Bufang, Lord Go's first stood on end as well. A heaven god, I told you not to play with fire. Now you're being targeted. Lord Go's mouth twitched, and he was speechless. The next moment, he opened his mouth and barked. Lord Go's body swelled in an instant, turning into a big black dog that blotted out the sky. Hellfire burned around his body. 3 dog heads floated in the air, erupting with terrifying power. Above his head, the law of time circulated. Lord Go lifted the heavenly god's bone and smashed it at the incoming palm, intending to resist it. The law of time pervaded the air, causing the entire world to slow down. Everyone's movements seemed to freeze. As the Lord Go's strength increased, the Lord Go's control over the law of time also became more adept. Even the divine emperor seemed to be affected. His eyes widened, and the muscles on his face twitched. All of them remained still. Lord Go arrived with the heaven god's bone in his hand. It floated in front of the heavenly god's palm. The Lord Go raised the heavenly god's bone and smashed it down, trying to push the heavenly god back. However, primal chaos chi spread out. Bang! It was as if the mirror image had shattered. Lord Go's law of time was shattered. The palm broke free from the restraints and instantly slapped the heavenly god's bone. There was a cracking sound. At this moment, the extremely sturdy heaven god's bone was covered in cracks. Lord Dog's body was also slapped into the void, causing him to move horizontally. Boom! The void bobbed up and down. The jade-like palm, as gentle as jade, was still slapping down unhurriedly. Primal chaos chi swirled around the palm. It was so terrifying that it almost suffocated people. Bufang stood where he was. He could feel the great terror emanating from the palm. He took a deep breath. The vermilion robe's invincibility should be able to block this palm, right? Bufang thought. However, this time, Bufang's heart seemed to throb. The invincibility of the vermilion robe might not be effective. Invincibility was not invincibility. Although it was ridiculous, Bufang felt that it might really happen. The heaven god realm was the pinnacle of the laws. It could even break all the laws. Invincibility was also a kind of law, and it could also be broken. Therefore, if Bufang were to stand in front of this palm, he was sure that on the day that palm fell, he would definitely be killed. It would be the moment he exploded. At this moment, he had fused with the heaven god's bone, and his body was as hard as a heaven god's. So Bufang moved. Of course, he wouldn't sit still and wait for death. Lord Go had bought him a breath of time, which was enough for Bufang to do a lot of things. His mind flickered. The black turtle constellation Wok emerged. The golden dragon bone kitchen knife also emerged. With a roar, the white tiger heaven stove suppressed the void. His vermilion robe also flapped noisily. Bufang's eyes burst out with extreme light. His divine sense surged, and a powerful will surged out like a surging river. Bufang's energy began to fluctuate and rise. The golden divine dragon emerged behind him. Nicholas the handsome dragon's eyes burst with brilliance. The vermilion bird cried, and a fiery red flame burned. The white tiger heaven stove emerged, and a fierce tiger came down the mountain. Over the black turtle constellation Wok, the black turtle carried the sky and yawned. In the face of the palm that was as gentle as jade, Bufang chose to unleash his strongest strength. The skin on his body seemed to have turned transparent. The heaven god's bone underneath was faintly visible. The divine flame burned around Bufang's body. Come on! Bufang looked straight at the sky, his face expressionless. He looked at the palm that was coming down. His hair fell apart, and his pitch-black hair danced in the air. His gaze was like thunder, tearing the sky apart. All the people in the divine dynasty sucked in their breaths. He's crazy. That's a heaven god's palm. Why didn't he run? Why did he choose to fight it head-on? The divine emperor's eyes flickered, and he sighed. Summer's face froze. She covered her mouth with her hand. Why does Mr. Boo do such exciting things every time? You stood behind Bufang. She could feel the terror of the palm. Even she might not be able to withstand it. What should I do? Is Bufang going to die? Bufang can't die. If he dies, what about my dragon blood rice? He was a little anxious. Bufang stared at the palm that was descending toward him. Finally, the palm approached. Rumble. The void was collapsing. There was only chaotic energy swirling around the palm. Buzz, the god of cooking sets, burst into countless beams of light. They were extremely bright. The palm slammed down. The god of cooking sets fell in an instant. They flew toward the palm. Boom! An earth-shattering collision ensued. The starry sky seemed to be blown away. Bufang's body trembled, and he felt a stream of heat rushing out of his abdomen. Then his mouth filled with, it was rich, the smell of blood, Bufong froze. Vomited blood? Bufong was in a trance. He hadn't vomited blood for many years. It was a shapeless tremor, and the tremor nearly shattered his physical body. If it weren't for the protection of the heaven god's bone, Bufong would have died on the spot. However, even with the heaven god's bone, Bufong was still coughing blood. Boom! The palm continued to fall. The power of a heaven god's palm was invincible. Heaven gods were the 5 existences who stood at the top of the chaotic universe. They represented the pinnacle of the 5 supreme laws. Everyone was in awe. The pressure it exerted caused everyone to be terrified. They knelt on the ground, shivering. The divine emperor was in his twilight years. His face was shaking, and he couldn't bear to look at it. In the face of a heaven god's palm, even he would be wiped out. A heaven god. It had never appeared in 10,000 years, but today it came with a murderous aura. Bufong, was he going to die? Was the person Mu Hongzhi had chosen going to die? The divine emperor sighed. Yu's eyes widened. Her fair skin was delicate, and her ghostly green hair was waving in the wind. She couldn't believe it. The smell of blood filled the air. A jet of blood shot out and splashed on her face. The blood splattered on her face. The dark red contrasted with her fair skin, making her look so flirtatious and obvious. Bufong vomited blood. It was the first time he had seen Bufong vomit blood. Crack! Crack! Bufong's eyes widened. It was as if a towering mountain was pressing down on him. The pressure almost made Bufong despair. Block it! Bufong's eyes widened. He didn't want to die. He hadn't become the god of cooking yet, and he hadn't eaten enough of the delicious food in the world. How could he die? Block it! Bufong roared. His aura surged. His pores opened. Over his head, the 3 supreme laws of the universe emerged and turned into a wheel of law, crushing the void. This made Bufong's strength much stronger. Bufong's lips were stained red with blood. Wisps of blood trickled down the corners of his mouth. This was the most critical moment for Bufong. In the distance, Lord Go, who had been knocked flying away, had returned to his original form. He had turned into a chubby black dog. With a complicated look in his eyes, he looked at Bufong, who was resisting with all his might. Could he block it? Lord Go didn't know. The palm, which was as translucent as jade, seemed to have immortal energy swirling over it, as well as chaos. If one looked carefully, they would find that it was a pair of extremely beautiful hands. Unfortunately, at this moment, it was going to kill Bufong. Bufong didn't have the time to look at your hands. Dragons roared, tigers roared, sparrows cried, and turtles roared. The god of cooking sets were resisting with all their might. They stood guard in all directions, forming the 4 symbols array. They rushed into the starry sky. They were resisting the blow of a heaven god. Bufong was too weak. He was only a demigod. Facing a heaven god, he was too weak. No one thought that Bufong could resist it. A heaven god was going to kill someone. That person had to die. No one was an exception. In the chaotic universe, the heaven gods were supreme. They were the true rulers. His palm slowly came crashing down. Then, with a loud rumble, the void collapsed and exploded. It was getting closer and closer. The crowd could feel that the aura bursting out of the palm was about to kill Bufong. In the void, Bufong was coughing up blood. The heaven god's bone was glowing, bursting with energy that wrapped his body. He was trying his best to resist. The heaven god's palm fell. A devastating explosion rang out. Everyone was blown away by the storm. In the explosion, the palm slowly dissipated. In a blur, the crowd could only see a thin figure standing in midair. Bufong's pupils constricted as he looked at everything in front of him. The sound of something shattering rang out. The dragon bone kitchen knife was covered with cracks. A gap appeared on the black turtle constellation walk. The white tiger heaven stove was broken into 2 pieces. His vermilion robe also fell apart. His god of cooking set, it was destroyed. Chapter 1538. It was the heaven god's palm. Even a god emperor would be killed in an instant if he were to face it. After all, a heaven god was supreme. Although a god emperor was strong, he was still far from being a heaven god. As for Bufang, he was just a demigod. How could he resist the heaven god's palm? No one thought that Bufang could resist it. Even if Bufang did his best, he still had no hope of resisting it. The gap between them was too great. One was heaven, and the other was earth. It was not so easy to make up for this gap. And it was true. In the face of the heaven god's palm, Bufang did not dare to relax. The throbbing in his soul forced Bufang to use all his strength. With all the god of cooking sets out, his defense was invincible. And the invincibility of the vermilion robe. Even a blow from a god emperor could not hurt Bufang. However, the heaven god's palm fell, exploding with extreme terror. The vermilion robe exploded, and its invincibility was broken in an instant. The white tiger heaven stove broke in half, and a cracking sound rang out. The dragon bone kitchen knife was covered in cracks, which looked extremely terrifying. Even the black turtle constellation wok, which was known for its defense, had a crack on it. Blood spurted out of Bufang's mouth. The blood splashed, emitting a dark red and bloody smell. Slowly, the heaven god's palm faded away. Bufang's figure staggered backward continuously, and finally he fell on his but on the ground. The god of cooking sets seemed to have lost their spirituality and fell to the ground with a clanging sound. The people around were dumbfounded. They watched indifferently and did not know what to say. Bufang was in a daze, and he seemed a little confused. From the light wind empire to here, the god of cooking sets that had accompanied him all the way here had cracks. The heaven god's palm could shatter the god of cooking sets. Bufang took a deep breath and felt a piercing pain in his lungs. The pain went deep into his bones. He was hurt. It had been a long time since he felt hurt. There was a tearing noise. Lord Go tore through the sky and landed beside Bufang. He looked at Bufang, who was only bleeding from the corner of his mouth, and couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. A gentle and magnetic voice resounded. "Fortunately, it's just an injury. It's already a blessing that I didn't die." The Lord Go said. There was a hint of relief in his words. However, when he saw the scattered god of cooking sets on the floor, he did not know what to say. For a chef, kitchenware was very important. If he wanted to become a top god of cooking, how could he do it without cooking tools? But now, Bufang's kitchenware was destroyed. This heavenly god is too much, the Lord Go said. With the kitchenware destroyed, Lord Go was afraid that Bufang would be devastated and never cook sweet and sour ribs again. In that case, the Lord Go would really want to cry, but have no tears. A dog's life without sweet and sour ribs would always be bleak. You landed beside Bufang. Looking at Bufang's lifeless eyes, her expression was somewhat complicated. Her face was stained with some blood. Wiping it away, you looked at Bufang and said, "It's okay. You don't have a weapon, but I'll protect you from now on." You did have the confidence to say that now. Although she had not fully mastered the cursed goddess's ability, she was not afraid of even the divine emperor. It was very easy for her to protect Bufang. Even if the whole world was her enemy, in the sky, a dark vortex was floating. The heaven god's palm that came out of it shattered Bufang's god of cooking set, but still did not dissipate. There seemed to be a follow-up that made the shy divine emperor's hair stand on end. He stared at the black vortex. Suddenly, his body shook, because in the vortex, he seemed to see a pair of eyes. Yes, it was a pair of eyes. His eyes were indifferent. His eyes had two pupils, which was extremely strange. With just a glance, the divine emperor felt that his soul was about to be taken away. What kind of eyes are these? A heaven god with double eyes? The pair of eyes looked straight down into the distance, where Bufang was. The owner of the pupils seemed to be puzzled as well. How could a mere demigod withstand his palm? But as a faint sound rang out, in the dark vortex, a beam of light shot out of the pair of eyes. The light was surrounded by mysterious runes. It shot out in an instant, heading straight for Bufang like a chain, trying to entangle Bufang. Clearly, the heaven god behind the dark vortex was very interested in Bufang. This change was beyond everyone's expectation. The heaven god was going to make a move. The divine emperor's expression changed dramatically. But there was nothing he could do. Bufang slowly raised his head, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. He stared blankly at the rune chain that was shooting toward him. The sense of crisis brought by the chain was very strong. The Lord Go was angry. This heaven god was too much. The Lord Go bared his teeth and growled. All of a sudden, Yu's graceful figure stood in front of Bufang. A dark green light burst out, turning into a roaring cursed snake that shot toward the rune chain. That's enough. Yu's eyes were dark green, and the cursed snake shot out. It collided with the chain. The cursed snake crumbled inch by inch, collapsing and disintegrating. Yu raised her jade-like palm and grabbed the rune chain. The rune chain was about to enter Yu's body, but it was completely crushed by the power of the curse. The eyes in the black vortex were slightly surprised. They gave you a deep look. Finally, the dark vortex began to collapse. This meant that the divine emperor's calamity was over. This caused everyone to feel as though a huge boulder that had been pressing down on their hearts had been lifted to the ground. It was finally over. The divine emperor was not dead. Some people were even cheering in a low voice. The divine emperor's eyes were complicated. Although he was not dead, it was all because of Bufang. If it weren't for Bufang's divine flame that had devoured the Dharma, the heaven god's palm had changed its target. Perhaps, at this moment, he would have already been reduced to ashes. The power of a heaven god was extremely terrifying. But as the dark vortex dissipated, the sky became clear, and the light of the stars flickered above the dome. This calamity was like a dream or an illusion. It brought endless terror. For everyone, it was probably a nightmare. For Bufang, it was a nightmare. Cough, cough. The divine emperor coughed in the void, coughing out drops of blood. His aura was still past its prime, but his body felt very relaxed. The calamity was gone. The calamity that had been haunting him and making him feel extremely heavy was gone. Without the calamity, the divine emperor could continue to live. Although his aura of life had become very weak, he was no longer as desperate as before. The divine emperor landed on the ground. Everyone gathered at the same time. Gold armor and black armor were very excited. King Pingyang and many other old courtiers flew over as well. Looking at the divine emperor, they were all too excited to speak. After exchanging greetings with them for a while, the divine emperor walked toward Bufang. Bufang sat on the ground, his hair disheveled. His vermilion robe was torn, revealing much of his fair skin. Blood trickled down the corners of Bufang's mouth and dripped to the ground. Mr. Bu, the shy divine emperor looked at Bufang with a complicated look in his eyes. He is truly worthy of being the man chosen by Mu Hongzi. I can't believe he survived the blow of a heaven god. That's a heaven god, an existence who stands at the top of the chaotic universe. I'm fine. Bufang slowly rose to his feet. He put away the god of cooking sets on the ground, which had lost their spiritual light. Then, he took out a robe from the system's storage space and put on. He breathed a sigh of relief. Yu and Lord Go both looked worriedly at Bufang. When a chef's cooking utensils were destroyed, it was a great blow. Will Bufang take things too hard? It's fine that your cooking utensils are destroyed. I'll immediately order the Xiai Divine Dynasty to collect the best cooking utensils to compensate for your loss. The Divine Emperor said. He felt that Bufang's cooking utensils were destroyed because of him, so he wanted to repay Bufang. It has nothing to do with you. We're just doing what we need. Bufang waved his hand and refused the Divine Emperor's request for help. He only helped the Divine Emperor for the Divine Flame. The sharp pain in his body told Bufang that he was in a very bad condition now. This was the worst injury he had ever suffered since he began his career. Come, let's go back to the restaurant. Bufang said. Lord Go and Yu immediately followed him. The surrounding people fell silent and looked at Bufang with complicated eyes. They could feel the destructive power contained in Bufang, which belonged to the heaven god. It was destroying Bufang's body all the time. A peerless genius who had comprehended 3 supreme laws of the universe had probably incurred the jealousy of the heavens. He had lost the glory of the past. At this moment, Bufong was so weak that even a 3-year-old could knock him down. Of course, Bufong was indeed in a miserable state at the moment, but he knew his condition very well. Bufong walked slowly, and no one dared to stop him. Luo Sanyang ran over and followed behind Bufong, tears in her eyes. Looking at Bufong's staggering back, she felt a pang of pain in her heart. Heaven is really jealous of geniuses. The Crown Prince's expression was complicated. Bufong's talent was far superior to his, but now that the big change had happened, Bufong would be weak for a long time. He might even fade into the crowd. However, no matter what, Bufong was worthy of admiration. The Crown Prince's eyes flashed. Suddenly, Bufong paused and turned to look at the Crown Prince. It's time to go back to the restaurant. The restaurant opens tomorrow. As a waiter, remember to do your job. Bufong said indifferently, his face expressionless. The Crown Prince's face froze. Well, even though he's seriously injured, this guy's temper is still the same. The Crown Prince twitched his mouth inwardly. Bufong left. Everyone dispersed with excitement in their hearts. The news that the Divine Emperor had successfully transcended the tribulation spread. It immediately shook the whole Divine Dynasty and even the entire chaotic universe. Countless people from the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty and the Titan Divine Dynasty were shocked. A Divine Emperor had actually transcended the tribulation? Was the Xiai Divine Dynasty going to have another Heaven God Divine Emperor? In that case, the Xiai Divine Dynasty would completely surpass the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty and the Titan Divine Dynasty. The emissaries of the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty returned. Now that the Divine Emperor had successfully transcended the tribulation, the restrictions on them were lifted. However, Feng Wuji did not go back. Instead, he settled down in the Xiai Divine Dynasty, not far from Bufong's restaurant. No one knew what he was thinking. In the Luo family's skyscraper, Luo Sanyang and the others were stopped outside the door. No one was allowed to enter except the restaurant staff. The heirs of aristocratic families, the young masters, and the others gathered outside the door, looking at each other. Summer sighed, left the restaurant, and returned to the Divine Chef Temple. Bufong's experience was really a tragedy. If Mu Hongzhi were here, what would he do? In the Luo family's skyscraper, in the restaurant's door was closed. Everyone was sitting at tables and chairs. The atmosphere was stagnant, and no one spoke. Lord Go lay under the path understanding tree, glancing in the direction of the kitchen from time to time. There was a helpless look on his fat face, and he sighed. Instantly, the fat on his body trembled. He sat quietly at the side, her eyes dark and deep. The Crown Prince sat behind the counter, thinking about something. Hades' era was a little confused. His heart was in turmoil, and he wanted to know what had happened. Who could tell him what had happened? Did he miss some big show when he was cultivating in seclusion? In the kitchen, Bufong had changed out his torn vermilion robe and was wearing a neat white robe. With his hands clasped behind his back, the god of cooking sets were placed in front of him. The torn vermilion robe, the cracked dragon bone kitchen knife, the cracked black turtle constellation wok, and the broken white tiger heaven stove. What should he do? Before he could collect all the god of cooking sets, they were all broken. Bufong was in a dilemma now. He did not know if he could repair them. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.